Welcome to the channel. We're so glad you're here. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to click like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Your support helps us create more awesome videos for you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Enjoy the video. The shadow in the hallway. It was Easter break, and 18-year-old Thomas was enjoying the rare luxury of having his family's large, modern house in the affluent suburbs of Berkshire, England, all to himself. His parents were on a holiday in France, leaving him to focus on his upcoming exams, a task he approached with a mixture of procrastination and half-hearted dedication. The house, a sprawling two-story structure separated from the quiet village by a long, winding driveway, offered the perfect environment for both studying and indulging in his favorite pastimes. Thomas relished the freedom, eating instant noodles at odd hours, watching movies late into the night, and revising in blissful silence. The recent weather had been tumultuous, a series of violent thunderstorms that rattled the windows and set off the house's overly sensitive burglar alarm on multiple occasions. Thomas, initially annoyed by the frequent alarms, had grown accustomed to them, dismissing them as false positives triggered by the wind and rain. He'd developed a routine of sleepily disarming the alarm without even bothering to check the security cameras. Saturday afternoon found Thomas engrossed in his revision, his textbooks and notes spread across the dining room table. A sudden, sharp sound startled him, a distinct thud, as if something had struck one of the upstairs windows. He paused, his pen hovering over a half-finished sentence. He listened intently, straining to hear over the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Silence. He shrugged, dismissing it as his imagination, a product of too much caffeine and too little sleep. He turned his music back on, the upbeat rhythm filling the room. A few minutes later, another sound, a softer, more muffled noise, like something had been knocked over upstairs. This time, Thomas couldn't ignore it. He jumped up, his heart pounding in his chest, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He racked his brain for a logical explanation. Could it be the wind? The house settling? A stray bird? But the sounds had been too distinct, too localized. He remembered the home security system, the network of cameras that monitored every corner of the house. He could access the footage from the family computer in the study. He raced to the study, his fingers flying across the keyboard, navigating to the security camera interface. He reviewed the footage from the last hour, his eyes scanning the screens, searching for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. The cameras showed only the empty rooms, the undisturbed furniture, the peaceful stillness of an unoccupied house. Thomas let out a sigh of relief, a wave of self-reproach washing over him. He was being ridiculous, letting his imagination run wild. He laughed at himself, shaking his head at his own jumpiness. He returned to the kitchen, intending to make himself dinner. The kitchen faced a set of large, glass sliding doors that led to the back garden. It was now evening, and the darkness outside had turned the glass into a mirror, reflecting the brightly lit interior of the house and the adjoining hallway. As he was preparing his meal, stirring a pot of noodles on the stove, he glanced up at the reflection in the glass, and his blood ran cold. There, in the reflection, standing motionless in the hallway behind him, was a man. He was short and scruffy, his clothes disheveled, his hair unkempt. He held something in his hand, a dark, indistinct object that Thomas couldn't quite make out, and he was staring directly at Thomas, his eyes fixed on his reflection in the glass. Thomas's body went into full panic mode. He didn't think, he just reacted. He bolted across the kitchen, towards the back door, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He flung open the door, stumbling out into the cool night air, not stopping until he was halfway down the long driveway. He had his phone with him, thankfully. He dialed 999, his voice trembling as he reported the intrusion, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to explain. He hid behind a thick bush, his eyes fixed on the house, waiting for the police to arrive. He didn't see the man emerge, didn't see any sign of movement. It felt like an eternity, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sending shivers down his spine. When the police finally arrived, they searched the house thoroughly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices echoing in the stillness. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no sign of the intruder. Thomas began to doubt himself. Had he imagined it? Had the stress of his exams, the isolation of the empty house, finally gotten to him? It wasn't until an hour later, after the police had left and Thomas was sitting, shaken and bewildered, in the living room, that the truth was revealed. The police had reviewed the CCTV footage, and they had found him. The footage showed the man entering the house not on Saturday, but on Thursday night, 2 full days earlier. He had somehow slipped in unnoticed, undetected, and had been hiding somewhere inside the house, all while Thomas had been going about his daily routine, blissfully unaware of the stranger lurking in the shadows. The man was later identified as a local homeless man with a history of mental illness. He was apprehended and charged, but the incident left an indelible mark on Thomas. He would never again feel truly safe alone in the house. The knowledge that a stranger had been living, undetected, under the same roof, watching him, observing him, was a terrifying violation that would haunt him for years to come. The comfort of home was forever shattered. The digital phantom. Graduation was just around the corner. 20-year-old Maya, a bright and bubbly college student, was buzzing with excitement. She had finally passed the dreaded statistics class that had threatened to derail her academic career, and she was looking forward to receiving her Associate of Arts degree. A celebration was definitely in order. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and Maya was lounging by the pool at her apartment complex, surrounded by her roommates and a few close friends. They were laughing, sharing stories, and basking in the glow of their collective accomplishments. Maya checked her phone, a grin spreading across her face as she saw the official confirmation. She had passed. "I did it," she announced, holding up her phone for everyone to see. "I officially passed stats." Cheers erupted around the pool. Maya's friends knew how much she'd struggled with the class, how many sleepless nights she'd spent poring over textbooks and wrestling with complex equations. "We're celebrating," one of her roommates, Chloe, declared. "Tonight, we're going all out." As the evening progressed, their plans shifted. Instead of going out to a crowded bar, they decided to stay in, order pizza, and watch movies. They invited a few more friends over, turning their small apartment into a lively hub of laughter and conversation. Around 2 a.m., the party began to wind down. People started heading home or crashing on the couches and spare mattresses. The only ones left were Maya, her 2 roommates, Chloe and Sarah, their respective boyfriends, and another friend, Liam. Feeling restless, they decided to take advantage of the warm night and go for a swim in the apartment complex's pool, which was conveniently located just outside their first-floor patio door. After their swim, Maya, feeling tired but content, decided to call it a night. Her roommates and Liam were still up, planning to head out to a late-night diner. Maya waved goodbye, grabbed a snack from the kitchen, and retreated to her bedroom. Her bedroom was at the back of the apartment, the furthest point from the front door and the patio. It was a large room, dominated by a single, expansive window that looked out onto the parking lot and the front gate of the complex. The gate, unfortunately, was currently broken, left perpetually open, a minor security concern that Maya had mostly ignored. She had a habit of leaving her blinds and curtains open, enjoying the natural light that flooded the room during the day. At night, however, the open window offered a clear view into her bedroom, especially when the lights were on. A large, mirrored closet door, directly opposite the window, reflected the entire room, making it even more visible from outside. Maya, exhausted from the day's festivities and the late-night swim, fell asleep quickly, her phone resting on her nightstand, the last time she checked showing 3:30 a.m. She had, crucially, left her bedroom light on. She woke up sometime later, disoriented and confused. The room was dark, but a strange, flickering light pulsed in the corner, near her closet. It was like a strobe light, slow and erratic, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Her first thought was that her roommates were playing a prank on her. "Very funny, guys," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized that the flickering light wasn't a strobe. It was the flash from a phone camera, and standing in the corner of her room, silhouetted against the faint glow of the window, was a man. He was tall, at least 6 feet, wearing a dark green hoodie that obscured his features. He held a phone in his hand, its camera pointed directly at Maya. He was taking pictures of her as she slept. The realization hit Maya like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a prank. This was a terrifying violation, a real and present danger. "What the hell?" she yelled, her voice a mixture of fear and outrage. Instead of running, as Maya expected, the man simply lowered his phone and walked towards the door. He didn't say a word, didn't make a sound. He moved with an unnerving calmness, as if he had all the time in the world. Maya, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to escape, scrambled out of bed and ran after him, screaming, "Hey, stop!" She reached the front door just as he was slipping out. She didn't see where he went, didn't see him disappear into the night. She ran back inside, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She woke up her roommates, frantically explaining what had happened. They were shocked and disbelieving at first, but Maya's terror was undeniable. They called the police, who arrived quickly, taking Maya's statement and searching the apartment. They found no sign of forced entry. Both the front door and the patio door, they discovered, had been unlocked. Maya checked her belongings, desperately hoping that nothing was missing. It was then that she noticed it. Her laptop, which had been on her desk, in the farthest corner of her bedroom, was gone. The realization of what that meant was chilling. Her laptop contained everything: her schoolwork, her personal files, her photos, and in a separate, zipped-up case inside her laptop sleeve was the SD card from her digital camera, filled with years of memories, including intimate and private photos. The police were unable to locate the intruder or recover Maya's laptop. The broken gate at the front of the complex offered little security, and there were no surveillance cameras that captured the man's entry or exit. The following days were a blur of anxiety and fear. Maya moved out of her apartment, staying with friends until she could find a new, more secure place to live. As she was packing her belongings, a few days after the incident, she happened to glance up at the apartment building across from hers, and she saw it. Hanging in the window of an apartment directly above where hers had been, clearly visible through the partially closed blinds, was a tapestry. It was the exact same tapestry that had hung on Maya's bedroom wall, a distinctive black and white design featuring 2 wolves howling at a full moon. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through her. It was a chilling confirmation that the intruder had been watching her, that he knew her, that he had been close enough to see the details of her room, to take something that held personal significance. The man was never caught. Maya never recovered her laptop or her SD card. The incident left her with a deep sense of violation and a lingering fear that she would never truly feel safe again. It was a harsh reminder of the vulnerability that existed in the digital age, the ease with which privacy could be invaded, and the terrifying reality that someone, somewhere, could be watching, waiting, and plotting without you ever knowing. Campground whispers. 12-year-old Lily was both thrilled and terrified. It was her first time at summer camp, a week-long adventure dedicated to learning horsemanship. She'd always loved animals, especially horses, and the idea of spending her days riding and caring for them filled her with excitement. But the thought of being away from her family, surrounded by strangers, in the unfamiliar wilderness, sparked a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The camp, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, was everything she'd imagined. Rustic cabins, sprawling pastures, and the constant, comforting presence of horses. The days were filled with riding lessons, grooming sessions, and campfire sing-alongs. Lily quickly made friends with the other girls in her cabin, bonding over their shared love of horses and their shared apprehension about being away from home. The one event that Lily dreaded was the sleep under the stars night. It was a camp tradition, a chance for the campers to experience the thrill of sleeping outdoors under the vast, starry sky. Lily, however, had a deep-seated fear of tents. They felt claustrophobic, confining, and vulnerable. But she didn't want to be the odd one out, the only girl who refused to participate. So, with a mixture of reluctance and forced enthusiasm, she joined the other campers as they set up their tents in a designated clearing, a short walk from the main cabins. For girls were assigned to each tent. Lily found herself sharing with 3 other girls she'd befriended during the week. Maya, a confident, outgoing girl. Chloe, a quiet, thoughtful girl. And Sarah, a giggly, energetic girl. The evening was filled with the usual camp activities, roasting marshmallows over a crackling campfire, telling spooky stories, and singing campfire songs. As darkness fell, the counselors ushered the campers to their tents, reminding them to be quiet and respectful of the other campers. Lily crawled into her sleeping bag, the nylon fabric feeling cold and unfamiliar against her skin. She lay there, stiff and uncomfortable, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the distant chirping of crickets. The other girls in her tent seemed to fall asleep almost instantly, their breathing soft and even. Lily, however, remained wide awake. She felt exposed, vulnerable, the thin fabric of the tent offering little protection from the unknown dangers of the night. She wished she were back in her own bed, in her own room, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home. She was starting to feel a bit drowsy, in spite of herself. Then, she began to hear something. It was a faint sound at first, barely audible above the natural noises of the night. But as she listened, it grew clearer, the distinct sound of footsteps, crunching on the dry leaves and twigs outside the tent. Lily held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She was positioned close to the mesh window of the tent, hoping to catch a cool breeze. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She tried to convince herself it was just a counselor making their rounds, checking on the campers. But the footsteps didn't sound like the heavy, purposeful tread of an adult. They were lighter, more hesitant, almost furtive. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside the tent. Lily felt a presence, a sense of someone kneeling just beyond the thin mesh window. She could feel their proximity, their unseen gaze. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to be invisible, to disappear into the darkness of the tent. But her curiosity, fueled by a growing sense of dread, got the better of her. She slowly, cautiously, opened her eyes. She peered through the mesh window, and she saw it. A figure, shrouded in darkness, kneeling just outside the tent. She couldn't make out any details, couldn't see their face, couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, an adult or a child. It was just a dark shape, a silhouette against the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. The silence was broken by a new sound, whispering. It was a low, murmuring sound, barely audible, like someone talking to themselves in a hushed tone. The whispering continued, uninterrupted, for what felt like an eternity. Lily strained her ears, trying to make out the words, but they were too indistinct, too muffled. It was the sound of a fever dream, a nightmare. She caught words and phrases. Savior, sacrifice, wept. Every so often, the whispering would stop. Lily would cautiously raise her head, peeking through the mesh window, expecting the figure to be gone. But it was always there, still kneeling, still silent, still watching. Then the whispering would start again, the same low, murmuring sound, the same unintelligible words. Lily tried to wake up the other girls, shaking their shoulders, whispering their names. But they slept soundly, oblivious to the terror unfolding just inches away. The whispering continued, on and off throughout the night. Lily lay there, frozen with fear, her eyes darting back and forth between the window and the sleeping forms of her tentmates. Eventually, during one of the periods of silence, exhaustion finally claimed her. She drifted off into a fitful, uneasy sleep, her mind filled with unsettling images and half-formed nightmares. She woke up with a jolt, the memory of the night before flooding back to her. She looked towards the window. The figure was gone. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden glow over the campground. The other girls were stirring, stretching, and yawning, their faces bright and cheerful. Lily, still shaken by her experience, cautiously asked them if they'd heard or seen anything during the night. They looked at her blankly, shaking their heads. "No," Maya said. "I slept like a log." "Me too," Chloe chimed in. "Didn't hear a thing." Sarah just giggled. "You probably just had a bad dream, Lily." Lily knew it hadn't been a dream. She knew what she'd seen, what she'd heard, but she also knew that no one would believe her. It was her secret, her burden, a chilling memory that would forever be etched in her mind. The rest of the camp experience passed without incident. Lily never saw the figure again, never heard the whispering again. But the memory of that night, the feeling of being watched, the unsettling sound of the unintelligible words, stayed with her, a constant reminder of the unseen, unexplained things that could lurk in the darkness. Highway hunters. The annual summer road trip was a cherished family tradition for 16-year-old Sophia. Every year, her family, Sophia, her younger sister, Isabella, and their parents would pile into their trusty minivan and drive several hours from their home in upstate New York to a picturesque coastal town in Rhode Island. It was a time for relaxation, seafood feasts, and long days spent on the beach. This year, however, their departure was delayed. Sophia's father, a dedicated accountant, had to work late, finishing up some urgent end-of-month reports. They finally set off in the middle of the night, the sky a vast expanse of inky blackness, punctuated by the occasional flicker of distant stars. Sophia, nestled in the back seat with Isabella, initially enjoyed the quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of streetlights. She drifted in and out of sleep, the darkness outside pressing against the windows. The first few hours of the drive were uneventful. The highway was mostly deserted, the only other vehicles being the occasional long-haul truck, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Around 3 a.m., Sophia was jolted awake by her father's sudden, sharp curse. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "What's wrong, Dad?" Sophia asked, her voice thick with sleep. Her father hesitated, his voice strained. "Nothing, honey. Go back to sleep." But Sophia was already alert, her senses on high alert. She noticed the tension in her father's shoulders, the way he kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Then, the car swerved violently, throwing Sophia and Isabella against the side doors. Isabella, who had been sound asleep, woke up with a startled cry. "What's happening?" Sophia's mother exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. "There's a Jeep," Sophia's father said, his voice tight with anger and fear. "They've been tailgating us for the last hour. Every time I change lanes, they change lanes. They're messing with us." Sophia peered out the back window. She could see the headlights of the Jeep, two bright circles in the darkness, relentlessly following them. The highway was otherwise deserted, a long, black ribbon stretching endlessly into the night. The realization of what was happening sent a chill down Sophia's spine. This wasn't just a case of aggressive driving. This was something else, something far more sinister. These people, whoever they were intentionally harassing them, stalking them on a deserted highway in the middle of the night. Sophia's mother suggested they pull over at the next rest stop and call the police. They saw a sign, "Rest area, 2 miles." Those 2 miles felt like an eternity. The Jeep continued to tailgate them, its headlights looming large in the rearview mirror. Sophia could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Finally, they reached the rest area. It was a small, brightly lit oasis in the surrounding darkness, a cluster of vending machines, restrooms, and a few picnic tables. Sophia's father pulled into the parking lot, as close to the main building as possible. The Jeep followed them, pulling in right behind them. Sophia's mother, Isabella, and Sophia scrambled out of the minivan, their legs shaky, their hearts pounding. They ran towards the building, intending to call 911. Sophia's father remained in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the Jeep. As Sophia reached the entrance to the building, she turned to look back, and what she saw would forever be etched in her memory. The Jeep, a dark navy blue, was parked directly behind their minivan. 5 figures emerged, their forms silhouetted against the bright lights of the rest area, and they were all wearing masks, white masks, blank and expressionless, except for the crude, unsettling smiles painted on them in garish colors. Each mask was different. One had a wide, toothy grin, another a leering, twisted smile, another a grotesque, exaggerated smirk. The masked figures stood there, silently motionless, except for their hands, which waved slowly, mockingly, in the direction of Sophia's father. One of the figures appeared to be holding something, a dark, indistinct object that Sophia couldn't quite make out. Sophia screamed, a primal, terrified sound that echoed in the stillness of the night. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to protect her family. Then, a miracle. A police car, its headlights flashing, pulled into the rest area. The masked figures, startled by the sudden appearance of law enforcement, quickly retreated to their Jeep, the doors slamming shut. The Jeep sped away, disappearing into the darkness from which it had come. The police officer, alerted by Sophia's screams, approached them cautiously. Sophia's family, shaken and trembling, recounted their terrifying ordeal, describing the Jeep, the masks, the relentless pursuit. They stayed at the rest stop until dawn, huddled together, their fear slowly giving way to a fragile sense of relief. They continued their journey, but the joy of their annual vacation had been irrevocably tainted. The masked figures were never identified, their motives never explained. The incident remained a chilling, unexplained mystery, a haunting reminder of the randomness of evil, the vulnerability of travelers on a lonely highway, and the terrifying reality that sometimes the monsters wear masks. The happy memories of family vacations, forever tainted. The furniture maker's touch. The first thing I noticed when I took over my father's furniture restoration business wasn't the outdated accounting software, or the stack of unpaid invoices on his desk, or even the ancient, sputtering espresso machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Carter administration. It was the padlock, a heavy, brass padlock, securing the door to a small storage room in the basement of the workshop. Its surface was dull with dust and age, but the metal still held a faint, stubborn gleam. My name is Charlie Harding, and I'm not a furniture maker. I'm a graphic designer, or at least I was, until my father, Samuel Harding, had a stroke 3 months ago. The doctors said he'd recover, eventually, but the business Harding and Son Fine Furniture Restoration, a small but respected establishment in a quiet corner of Providence, Rhode Island, couldn't wait. Someone had to step in, and that someone apparently was me. I found the key to the padlock buried in the bottom drawer of Dad's massive oak desk, underneath a pile of yellowed warranties for equipment we probably didn't even own anymore. The metal was surprisingly cold against my palm as I stood in front of that basement door, listening to the steady drip, drip, drip of water leaking from a pipe somewhere in the darkness. The lock clicked open with a loud, echoing sound that seemed to bounce off the concrete walls. The storage room smelled of old wood, beeswax, and something else, something floral, almost cloyingly sweet. I pulled the chain for the single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Yellow light spilled across what looked like the contents of a particularly eccentric estate sale. Antique furniture was crammed into every corner, Victorian settees with cracked leather upholstery, delicate end tables with water rings marring their polished surfaces, a massive armoire that must have been a nightmare to get down those narrow stairs. But it was the dolls that caught my eye, dozens of them, arranged on shelves that lined the walls, their porcelain faces gleaming in the dim light, their glass eyes reflecting the single bulb like tiny, watchful jewels. I recognized some of them from my grandmother's house. She'd been an avid collector, always bringing home new finds from antique shops and flea markets. Dad had inherited everything when she passed away 5 years earlier. I guess he couldn't bring himself to part with any of it. I was examining a queen and chair, assessing its condition, the cracked frame, the faded upholstery, the missing veneer, when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged across wood. I turned around slowly. Nothing seemed out of place. The dolls stared back at me, their painted smiles frozen, their glass eyes unnervingly still. I blamed it on the old building, the uneven floors, my own overactive imagination. I'd been working long hours, trying to get the company's finances in order, dealing with disgruntled clients, and navigating the unfamiliar world of furniture restoration. Stress could do strange things to your perception. I went back to examining the chair, but as I reached out to touch the cracked leather, I heard the scraping sound again, louder this time, and closer. It was coming from behind me. I spun around. One of the dolls, a small porcelain figure with a painted-on smile and rosy cheeks, had fallen face down on the shelf. I picked it up carefully, noting its surprising weight, the intricate detail of its lace dress, the delicate brushstrokes of its painted features. When I set it upright, I noticed something odd. There was dust on the shelf, a thick layer of it, everywhere, except for a long, clean streak leading directly to where the doll had fallen. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Mr. Henderson, our biggest client, threatening to pull his account if we didn't deliver his restored dining set by the end of the week. I spent the rest of the day in crisis mode, dealing with Mr. Henderson's demands, soothing ruffled feathers, and trying to navigate the labyrinthine world of furniture restoration schedules. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right in that basement. Something about that fallen doll, that clean streak in the dust. That night, I stayed late at the workshop, poring over old invoices and contracts. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Hello," I called out. No response. The security system was armed. No one else should have been in the building. I grabbed my phone, activating the flashlight app, and walked down the hall, my heart pounding. Empty. But as I passed the basement door, I heard it again, that scraping sound, clearer now, more distinct, and then a soft thump. My hand trembled as I unlocked the basement door. The storage room was still locked, the heavy padlock gleaming dully in the dim light. But I could hear movement inside, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like furniture being moved across the floor. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the key in my hand, my mind racing. Rats? I thought. Maybe a large raccoon had somehow gotten in? The old building was full of cracks and crevices. The scraping stopped. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of tiny, porcelain fingers tapping against wood. I unlocked the padlock, the chain clinking as I pulled it free. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. I opened the door. The chair. The queen and chair I'd been examining earlier. It had moved. It was now positioned directly in the center of the room, facing the entrance. And sitting in it was one of the dolls. The largest one, a Victorian-era figure with a blue silk dress and elaborate ringlets of auburn hair. I definitely remembered seeing it on the top shelf earlier that day. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, as if it were studying me. Its glass eyes reflected the beam of my flashlight, two tiny, unnervingly bright points of light in the darkness. I backed away, slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Before I could reach the door, I heard movement behind me. I turned. Another doll. It was walking across one of the shelves. Its tiny porcelain feet made clicking sounds against the wood. More movement, all around the room. The dolls were stirring. Small heads turned. Jointed arms began to reach out. Porcelain fingers flexed. I ran. I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the padlock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key to turn. From inside, I could hear the scraping sound getting louder, accompanied by the click, click, click of dozens of tiny feet on wood and on the floor. The lock finally caught. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, my back pressed against the cold concrete wall. Multiple somethings, hit the other side of the door with a series of soft, but insistent, thumps. I made it up the stairs somehow and out of the building. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I spent the rest of the night in a 24-hour diner, drinking lukewarm coffee and trying to convince myself I was having some kind of stress-induced breakdown. Things like this didn't happen in real life. They couldn't. But when I arrived at the workshop the next morning, I found the storage room door standing wide open. The padlock lay on the floor, still locked, its hasp somehow twisted, ripped completely from its mounting. Inside, every single piece of furniture had been arranged in a perfect circle around that queen and chair, and every single doll was sitting exactly where it had been 2 days earlier, posed primly on their shelves, their painted smiles fixed, their glass eyes seemingly following my every move. I spent that morning researching the building's history, desperately searching for anything that might explain what was happening. The company had been in the family for 3 generations, operating out of the same converted warehouse since my grandfather's time. Before that, the records showed it had been a textile mill in the early 1900s. Nothing. No reports of unusual deaths. No tragic accidents. No mysterious disappearances. Nothing that would suggest a haunting or whatever this was. Then I found an old newspaper article tucked away in a dusty archive file. A small, local news item from 1912 about a fire at the textile mill. Several workers had been killed, trapped in the basement storage area, when a faulty boiler exploded. The article mentioned that one of the victims had been a young woman, a seamstress who made dolls in her spare time, selling them to supplement her meager income. I printed the article and took it down to the basement, my hand steady this time, as I unlocked the storage room door. The furniture was still arranged in that perfect circle. I walked to the center of the room and sat down in the queen and chair. "I know you're here," I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "I know what happened to you."
I'm sorry.
Nothing moved. The only sound was my own breathing, and that eternal drip, drip, drip of water from the leaky pipe. Then I heard it, that familiar scraping sound. One of the dolls on the middle shelf turned its head to look at me, then another, and another. Soon, every glass eye in the room was fixed on my face. The largest doll, the one in the blue silk dress, stood up. Its porcelain feet clicked against the wood as it walked to the edge of the shelf. Stopped there, looking down at me. This was your place," I said, my voice trembling slightly. You worked here. You made dolls." The doll's head tilted, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. Behind it, I could see the others starting to move, climbing down from their shelves, with jerky, unnatural motions. They gathered around the blue-dressed doll, like children around a teacher. I don't want to take this space from you," I continued, "but I need to run this business. My father, he's sick. The company will fail if someone doesn't." The blue-dressed doll took another step forward, then another. It walked right off the edge of the shelf. I started to lunge forward instinctively to catch it, but before it could fall, it stopped, floating in midair. The other dolls followed, drifting down from their shelves like fallen leaves, their movements silent and graceful. They formed a circle around my chair, looking up at me with their wide, glassy eyes. The blue-dressed doll floated up until it was at eye level with me. This close, I could see the fine cracks in its porcelain skin, the way its painted lips were slightly faded at the corners. It reached out one tiny hand and pointed at the newspaper article I was still clutching. Then it pointed at the furniture arranged around us. And finally, it pointed at me. Understanding dawned. You want to help?" The doll nodded, a barely perceptible movement of its head. You know this building. You worked here. You want to see it succeed." Another nod. Around us, the other dolls had begun to move, straightening the furniture, dusting off surfaces with their tiny hands. One of them picked up a fallen table leg I hadn't even noticed and began trying to reattach it. I let out a laugh, a shaky, slightly hysterical sound, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Okay," I said. "Okay, we can work something out. You can stay here. This can still be your space. Just maybe we can figure out a way to do this that doesn't involve giving me a heart attack." The blue-dressed doll's painted lips seemed to curve upwards, slightly, at the corners. It extended its hand again, this time palm up, as if offering to shake on our deal. I reached out, hesitantly, and touched my index finger to its tiny, porcelain palm. Its touch was cold, but not unpleasant. That was 6 months ago. The company is doing surprisingly well. I've modernized the accounting system, brought in some new clients, and even hired a few additional employees. But I've kept the basement storage room exactly as it was, though I did install better lighting, and I brought in some tools and materials for repairs. Every morning, when I arrive, I unlock the basement door and say, "Good morning, ladies." They never move when anyone else is around, but sometimes I'll come down to find a piece of furniture perfectly restored overnight, or discover that they've reorganized the storage space in a way that makes far more sense than anything I could have come up with. The blue-dress doll, I call her Clara now, after the name I found in that old newspaper article, seems to have appointed herself as my assistant manager. She has excellent taste in furniture and an eye for detail that comes from decades of watching. Dad's recovering slowly. I haven't told him about our new helpers yet. I'm not sure how to explain that his mother's doll collection has become an integral part of our restoration department. But the other day, when he visited the workshop, he commented on how good everything looked. "Just like the old days, Charlie," he said, smiling. "Like there's still some real pride in the craftsmanship." I caught a glimpse of movement from the basement doorway, just a flash of blue silk disappearing into the shadows, and I could have sworn I heard the faintest sound of porcelain hands clapping. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm working late, I'll hear music drifting up from the basement. The tinkling notes of an old music box, playing a melody I don't recognize. I'll go down to find the dolls having what looks like a party, dancing in circles around that old queen and chair. They always invite me to join them, though mostly I just watch. It's still a bit unsettling, if I'm honest, but there's something oddly comforting about it, too. I've learned to accept that some things in life don't need rational explanations. Sometimes, you just need to trust that the past has its own way of taking care of the present. And sometimes, the best business partners are the ones who've been there all along, silently watching, waiting for someone to finally notice them. The company's ledgers show a mysterious new expense category now: restoration supplies, special projects. Every month, I make sure to order new ribbons and lace and tiny porcelain doll parts. I leave them on the shelves at night and find them transformed into perfect repairs by morning. It's an unconventional arrangement, to be sure, but it works for us. And if clients sometimes comment that our restored pieces seem to have a certain life to them, a certain warmth that modern furniture lacks, well, that's just part of the Harding and Son family business's special touch. Though I do make sure to warn new employees about the basement. "Don't mind any noises you might hear down there," I tell them. "It's just the old building settling, and maybe a few other things that have settled here too." They usually laugh it off, but they also don't question why the basement door always stays locked, or why I'm the only one who goes down there after hours. Some things in a family business, after all, are best kept in the family, even if that family now includes a collection of antique dolls with glass eyes and secrets of their own. And I always make sure the coffee is fresh. Clara prefers it that way. The glimmering gaze. The old house in the Inland Empire of Southern California held a unique blend of comfort and unease for 8-year-old Clara. It was a 2-story structure, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, its stucco walls painted a warm, inviting beige. But there was something about the way the shadows fell The way the wind whispered through the eucalyptus trees in the backyard, that sometimes made Clara's skin crawl. Her room was on the ground floor, next to the front door. The window, large and rectangular, offered a view of the street, but the blinds were rarely fully closed. A 6-inch gap remained at the bottom, a sliver of uncovered glass that, on most nights, was inconsequential. Clara's parents, a loving and practical couple, were often preoccupied. Her father, a dedicated police officer, worked long, unpredictable night shifts in a neighboring city. Her mother, a busy nurse, often worked late as well. Clara, an only child at the time, her younger brother wouldn't arrive for another few years, was often left to her own devices, her imagination her constant companion. On this particular night, Clara's father was away on duty, and her mother was asleep upstairs in the master bedroom, exhausted after a double shift at the hospital. Clara, tucked into her bed, drifted off to sleep, the soft glow of her night light casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sometime after midnight, she woke up, abruptly, without any apparent reason. She lay there, staring up at the ceiling, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. She felt a strange sense of alertness, a prickling awareness that something wasn't quite right. She sat up in bed, looking around the room. Her gaze fell upon the window, and that's when she saw it. 2 points of light, bright and white, glowing in the gap between the bottom of the blinds and the windowsill. They were perfectly round, perfectly symmetrical, spaced apart as if they were eyes. Clara's first thought was that it was a reflection, a trick of the light. The streetlight outside often cast strange patterns on her window, but she knew with a growing sense of unease that this was different. The streetlight was a single, diffuse glow, not two distinct focus points of light. Her next thought, fueled by a desperate hope that it was something harmless, was that it was her cat, Chelsea. Chelsea, a sleek black feline with piercing green eyes, often roamed the neighborhood at night. But Chelsea's eyes, when reflecting light, had a distinct greenish tinge. These eyes were pure white, unervingly bright, devoid of any color. Clara stared at the glowing eyes, frozen in place, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. They were too high off the ground to be a cat. The windowsill was at least 4 feet from the ground. What could possibly be out there, staring back at her? A wave of fear, cold and primal, washed over her. She wanted to scream, to call for her mother, but her voice was caught in her throat. She gathered her courage, driven by a mixture of fear and a desperate need to understand. She slowly got out of bed, her bare feet padding softly on the carpet. She knelt down, getting closer to the window, her eyes fixed on the glowing orbs. And then the most terrifying thing happened. The eyes, still locked on Clara, began to tilt, slowly, steadily, as if the head to which they were attached was cocking to the side, studying her with an unnerving curiosity. The movement was so unnatural, so inhuman, that it shattered any remaining doubt in Clara's mind. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't a reflection. This was something else entirely. Clara screamed, a high-pitched, terrified sound that ripped through the silence of the house. She scrambled back, tears streaming down her face, and ran, as fast as her little legs could carry her, down the hallway, through the living room and up the stairs to her mother's room. She burst into her mother's room, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to articulate what she had seen. Her mother, jolted awake by the sudden commotion, tried to calm her, her voice filled with concern. "What's wrong, sweetie? What happened?" Clara, through gasps and sobs, managed to stammer out, something, in my window, eyes." Her mother, initially skeptical, followed Clara back to her room, expecting to find a stray cat or a misplaced toy. But the room was empty. The blinds were still partially open, the gap at the bottom revealing only the darkness of the night outside. Her mother immediately called the police and an officer responded. He didn't find anything. Years later, She asked about that night, and her mother confirmed that the officer reported a similar incident nearby. This event cemented her belief. The butcher's secret. The small, lakeside town of Havenwood was, for the most part, idyllic. Nestled amidst rolling hills and surrounded by a sparkling expanse of water, it was a popular summer destination for city dwellers seeking respite from the urban sprawl. For 25-year-old Liam, it was a temporary escape, a chance to earn some money and enjoy the tranquility of a rural setting. His wife, Sarah, a biologist with a thriving career, had secured a research project that allowed her to work remotely. They'd packed up their belongings, along with their 5-year-old son, Finn, and rented a cozy cottage on the lake, intending to spend the entire summer there. Liam, a trained butcher with years of experience, had no trouble finding work. The town had only one grocery store, Havenwood Provisions, a small, family-owned establishment that catered to both locals and the influx of summer tourists. The store's owner and head butcher was a man named Walter. Walter was a peculiar character. He was tall and lanky, with greasy black hair that he constantly slicked back with his hand. He had a prominent nose, small, beady green eyes that seemed to dart around nervously, and a surprisingly deep, rumbling voice. His teeth, when he smiled, were small and crowded, resembling those of a child. For the first few weeks, Walter seemed relatively normal, albeit a bit reserved. He was a man of few words, mostly communicating through grunts and nods. He didn't seem to mind that Liam was often a few minutes late for his 7 a.m. shift, a habit Liam attributed to his relaxed, small-town attitude. But as time went on, Liam began to notice a darker side to Walter's personality. He would have sudden, unpredictable outbursts of anger, exploding over minor mistakes or perceived inefficiencies. He'd yell and curse, his face turning red, his veins bulging in his neck. Then, just as quickly, he'd revert to his usual quiet demeanor, as if nothing had happened. These outbursts were unsettling, but Liam initially chalked them up to stress. Running a small business, especially during the busy summer season, was undoubtedly demanding. He'd worked with intense butchers before, old-school guys who were passionate about their craft and had little patience for incompetence. He figured Walter was just one of those types. But then the comments started. Subtle, veiled threats, muttered under his breath. "You better get this done right or you'll be sorry," Walter would say, his eyes fixed on Liam with an unsettling intensity. Or, "Sometimes I think you'd be more useful to me dead." These remarks made Liam increasingly uncomfortable. He tried to brush them off as dark humor, a twisted way of motivating his employees. But the way Walter said them, the coldness in his voice, the glint in his eyes, suggested something more sinister. One morning, Liam was significantly late. He'd gotten stuck in a traffic jam caused by a flock of geese crossing the road, a common occurrence in Havenwood, but one that always seemed to happen at the most inconvenient times. He arrived at the store, flustered and apologetic, to find Walter standing in the meat cooler, his back to the door. He was wearing his usual butcher's apron, stained with the inevitable splashes of blood from the morning's work. He held a large, gleaming butcher knife in his hand. Liam began to apologize, explaining the reason for his tardiness, but Walter cut him off. He raised his hand, silencing Liam, and slowly turned around. His face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "This," Walter said, his voice low and menacing, "will be the last time you're late. The last person who disrespected me." He paused, his eyes darting around the cooler, as if searching for the right words. Then, he looked down at the floor, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Never mind. Just don't be late again." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Liam felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just the ranting of a stressed-out boss. This was something else, something darker and more dangerous. The next few days were tense. Walter was unusually quiet, barely speaking to Liam, his eyes constantly following him around the shop. It was unnerving, but Liam preferred the silence to the outbursts. One evening, Walter left early, instructing Liam to finish up a few tasks and clean the meat room before closing. Liam, eager to get home to Sarah and Finn, worked quickly and efficiently. It was around 7 p.m., and he was about to lock up when he noticed something odd. In the back corner of the meat cooler, next to the large stainless steel bone cans where they disposed of bones and trimmed fat, was a small pool of blood. This in itself wasn't unusual. Blood was a constant presence in a butcher shop, but this pool looked fresh and it was unusually large. And there was a smell, a foul, pungent odor that made Liam's stomach churn. He cautiously approached the bone can, his senses on high alert. The can was heavier than usual, almost impossible to move. He lifted the lid, just a crack, and the smell hit him like a physical blow. It was the smell of decay, of rot, of something deeply, profoundly wrong. He saw it then through the narrow opening meat, but not the kind of meat he was used to seeing. This meat was discolored, almost greenish in places, and covered in a thick, viscous fluid. And there was blood, a lot of blood, far more than should have been there. He quickly replaced the lid, his mind racing. What was in that can? Why did it smell so bad? And why was Walter so secretive about it? He left the store that night, his unease growing with every passing minute. He couldn't shake the image of the discolored meat, the foul smell, the unsettling feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, he arrived at the store to find Walter already there, standing in the meat cooler, his back to the door, in the exact same spot he'd been in the previous evening. As Liam approached, Walter turned around. His face was contorted with rage, his eyes blazing with an almost manic intensity. He held the butcher knife in his hand, not casually, but with a deliberate, threatening grip. "What do you think you saw in that can?" Walter demanded, his voice a low, guttural growl. He took a step closer, poking Liam in the chest with his finger, his voice rising in volume. "Come on, pal. Tell me, what did you see? I know you were digging around. Just tell me." Liam, terrified and bewildered, decided he'd had enough. He wasn't going to risk his safety for a job, especially not with a man who seemed increasingly unhinged. "I'm done," Liam said, his voice trembling but firm. "I quit." He turned to leave, but Walter followed him, his anger escalating. He continued to yell, to demand answers, to accuse Liam of snooping. Liam made it to his car, his heart pounding in his chest. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them in the ignition. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Glancing in his rearview mirror, Walter was still there, standing in the middle of the lot, screaming after him, his face contorted with rage. Liam drove home, his mind racing. He told Sarah everything, his voice shaking as he recounted the events of the past few weeks, culminating in Walter's terrifying outburst. Sarah, understandably alarmed, supported his decision to quit. She suggested they leave Havenwood altogether, return to the safety of the city. But the story didn't end there. A week later, Liam was awakened in the early hours of the morning by a strange flickering light outside his window. He got out of bed, cautiously approaching the window, his heart pounding in his chest. Parked across the street, directly in front of his house, was a large, red pickup truck. It was the same truck that was always parked outside of Havenwood Provisions, the same truck that Walter drove. But the truck was empty. There was no sign of Walter, no sign of anyone. Liam watched the truck for hours, his fear growing with each passing minute. He didn't know what Walter was doing, why he was there, what he was planning. Around 7:30 a.m., the truck finally drove away. For the next few nights, Liam saw the truck again, cruising slowly past his house, its headlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. He couldn't see the driver, couldn't make out any details, but he knew it was Walter. He reported the incidents to the police, but without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do. A few weeks later, Liam and Sarah decided to return to Havenwood to retrieve some belongings they'd left behind at the lake house. When they arrived, they found the house ransacked. A window had been broken, furniture overturned, and personal items strewn across the floor. It was a clear message, a final act of intimidation. They never saw Walter again, never learned the truth about what was in that bone can. But the memory of his unsettling behavior, his veiled threats, his terrifying outburst, would forever haunt Liam. The idyllic summer escape had turned into a nightmare, a chilling reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary places. They sold the lake house, the figure in the gale. The summer nights in their coastal city were usually calm and peaceful, but tonight, a fierce wind was whipping through the streets, rattling windows and sending debris swirling through the air. 16-year-old Alex and his best friend, Jamie, were walking home from a late-night gathering at their friend Chris's house. It had been a typical teenage get-together: video games, junk food, and endless discussions about everything and nothing. Alex, unlike his friends, didn't partake in the drinking or smoking that had become a regular part of these gatherings. He preferred to stay sober, a designated driver in case anyone needed a ride. As they approached 2:30 a.m., Alex and Jamie decided to head home. Chris lived about a 30-minute walk from Jamie's house, a journey they'd made countless times before. The route took them through a city park, a sprawling green space that, during the day, was a haven for families and dog walkers. But at night, the park transformed into a realm of shadows and silence, its beauty replaced by an unsettling eeriness. The wind howled around them, buffeting their bodies and making it difficult to walk in a straight line. The streetlights along the road flickered intermittently, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on their eyes. As they exited the park, their unease grew. The silence of the park had been replaced by the unsettling sounds of the wind, the rustling of leaves, the creaking of branches, the distant wail of a siren. They stopped at a gas station, a brightly lit beacon in the surrounding darkness. The young woman behind the counter, her face bored and expressionless, asked Alex to leave his backpack at the door. They probably looked suspicious. Two teenagers stumbling into the brightly lit store at 3 a.m., their eyes wide and unfocused. Alex complied, leaving his backpack by the entrance. They quickly grabbed some snacks and drinks, paid for their items, and stepped back out into the blustery night. The wind seemed to have intensified, whipping their hair and stinging their faces. They walked quickly, their heads down, trying to shield themselves from the gusts. A few blocks ahead, they saw a dilapidated house, set far back from the road, surrounded by an overgrown lawn. It was a stark contrast to the well-maintained homes that lined the rest of the street. The windows were broken, the paint was peeling, and the wooden shutters banged rhythmically against the walls in the wind, creating a cacophony of creaks and slams. Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. The house seemed to exude an aura of decay and neglect, a sense of something deeply wrong. He quickened his pace, urging Jamie to do the same. "Let's just get past this place," Alex muttered, his voice barely audible above the wind. Jamie, still slightly buzzed from the earlier festivities, seemed oblivious to the unsettling atmosphere. He was slurping loudly on his drink, his eyes unfocused. As they approached the house, the wind seemed to pick up even more, swirling around them in a vortex of dust and debris. The shutters banged louder, the creaking sounds more insistent, more menacing. Then, in the distance, they saw a figure. It was a person, tall and thin, crossing the road ahead of them. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity, almost as if they were gliding rather than walking. They were wearing what appeared to be a long, flowing dress or robe, the fabric billowing in the wind. Alex and Jamie stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes fixed on the figure. They couldn't make out any details, couldn't see their face, couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. But there was something deeply unsettling about the way they moved, the way they seemed to float across the road. The figure entered a small parking lot on the other side of the street, disappearing from view. Alex and Jamie exchanged terrified glances. They didn't speak, didn't need to. They both felt it, a primal fear, a sense of impending danger. They started walking again, faster this time, their eyes scanning the streets, searching for any sign of the figure. They reached Jamie's house, a two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, its windows dark and silent. As they stood on the porch, fumbling with the keys, Alex realized something. His backpack. He'd left it at the gas station. A wave of dread washed over him. The backpack contained his most prized possessions, including a PlayStation 3 he'd brought to Chris's house. Jamie, now fully sobered by the encounter with the strange figure, looked at Alex with wide, fearful eyes. "You're not going back there, are you?" Alex hesitated. He didn't want to go back, didn't want to retrace their steps, didn't want to encounter that figure again. But he couldn't leave his backpack. They decided to go together, bracing themselves for whatever might await them. They ran back towards the gas station, the wind whipping at their faces, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they neared the dilapidated house, the wind suddenly died down. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. Alex felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched. He glanced at the house, his heart skipping a beat. The front door, which had been closed earlier, was now wide open. And then, with a loud, echoing bang, the wind slammed it shut. They sprinted past the house, not daring to look back, their fear propelling them forward. They reached the gas station, breathless and terrified. Alex ran inside, grabbing his backpack from the counter. The woman behind the counter, still looking bored and unfazed, simply nodded. Jamie, desperate to escape the unsettling atmosphere, asked the woman if she could give them a ride home. She refused, explaining that she couldn't leave the counter unattended. They stepped back outside, their fear slowly giving way to a sense of relief. They tried to rationalize what they had seen, to convince themselves it was just their imaginations, fueled by exhaustion and the eerie atmosphere of the night. But as they started walking back, the figure reappeared. This time it was closer, much closer. It was standing in the middle of the road, directly in their path, its form silhouetted against the flickering streetlights. It was tall and slender, wearing a long, flowing dress that billowed in the wind. They started to run. The figure began to move, walking after them, its movements strangely fluid, almost gliding. It seemed to disappear and reappear, always just behind them, always just out of reach. They finally reached Jamie's house, sprinting up the porch steps, fumbling with the keys. They burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind them, locking it, bolting it. As they stood there, breathless and trembling, they heard it, a faint scratching sound on the porch, like someone dragging their fingernails across the wood. Alex, against his better judgment, peeked through the curtains. The street outside was empty. The figure was gone. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, too terrified to sleep. They laughed nervously, trying to make light of the situation, but the fear lingered, a cold, hard knot in their stomachs. They never saw the figure again, never learned who or what it was. But the memory of that night, the image of the flowing dress, the unsettling silence, the feeling of being pursued by an unseen presence, would forever haunt their dreams. They would always wonder if they just imagined things, but deep down never wanted to truly find out. The mirror messages. The first message appeared 3 days after I moved in. I was brushing my teeth, the morning sun slanting through the bathroom window, when I noticed it, forming in the condensation on the mirror. Get out. The letters were backwards, of course, mirrored, as if someone had written them from inside the glass. I wiped it away immediately, a reflexive action, but my hand was shaking so badly I dropped my toothbrush in the sink. My name is Sarah Chun, and I'm a software engineer. I'd taken the apartment, a small one-bedroom in a renovated brownstone in Seattle's Belltown neighborhood, because it was cheap and close to my new job. The Craigslist ad had mentioned 2 other roommates, but I hadn't met them yet. Our schedules apparently didn't align. I heard them sometimes moving around in their rooms or in the kitchen, but we were like ships passing in the night, our lives intersecting only in the shared space of the apartment. The apartment itself was nothing special.
Beige walls, worn carpeting.
Furniture that had seen better days. But it was a roof over my head, a temporary refuge while I got back on my feet after a rather messy breakup. That first morning, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Sleep deprivation, stress from the move, the lingering emotional fallout from the breakup. It could all be playing tricks on my mind. I went to work, trying to focus on debugging code and attending meetings, but the image of those backwards letters, forming in the condensation, kept flashing in my mind. That evening, I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the lingering unease. As the steam filled the bathroom, I saw it again. The others didn't listen. The words appeared slowly, one letter at a time, as if invisible fingers were dragging themselves across the fogged-up surface of the mirror. I cleaned the mirror thoroughly, using Windex and a microfiber cloth, making sure to get every corner, every edge. The next morning, a new message. They never leave. My hands were sweating as I wiped it away. I started taking photos with my phone, documenting the messages, a desperate attempt to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. After a week, I started keeping a notebook. The messages appeared twice daily, always when I showered, or when the mirror fogged up from the steam of the sink. They never repeated exactly, but they all carried the same ominous, threatening tone. Watch your back. Don't sleep too deeply. Check the locks. They're always watching. I installed a small, battery-powered security camera in the bathroom, pointing it directly at the mirror. The footage showed nothing. The messages simply appeared, forming in the condensation as if by magic. No hands, no movement, nothing unusual, except the words themselves, appearing letter by letter, in reverse. The sounds of my roommates became more noticeable. Footsteps in the hallway at odd hours. Cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen at 3 a.m. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the morning to find things in my room slightly moved. My laptop shifted an inch to the left. My shoes rearranged by the door. My coffee mug on the opposite side of the desk. I tried leaving notes for my roommates, slipping them under their doors. Hey, would love to meet up sometime. Sarah, 3B. No response. I knocked on their doors during what I considered to be reasonable hours. No answer. The rent was automatically deducted from my bank account each month, so I had no reason to contact the landlord. I was trapped in a silent, increasingly terrifying dance with something I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape. The messages grew more urgent. Check behind the walls. Listen for the scratching. Count the shadows. They move at night. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. I bought a high-powered flashlight and kept it by my bed, a flimsy weapon against the unseen. During the day, I'd press my ear against the walls, trying to hear what was happening in the other rooms. Sometimes, I'd catch fragments of conversations, muffled voices, but they were too indistinct to make out any words. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom and found all the kitchen cabinets standing open. Every single one. The refrigerator door was ajar, too, casting a pale, sickly light across the linoleum floor. I knew I hadn't left them that way. I barely cooked, subsisting mostly on microwave meals and takeout. I was meticulous about closing doors and cabinets, a habit born from years of living alone. I started taking before and after pictures, photos of my room, the kitchen, the living room before I left for work each morning, and then comparing them when I got home. Small things were always different. The angle of the throw pillows on the couch, the position of magazines on the coffee table, the arrangement of dishes in the drying rack. Nothing major, nothing I could definitively prove wasn't just my own forgetfulness, but enough to keep me constantly on edge, to fuel the growing paranoia that was consuming me. The messages continued relentlessly. They're getting closer. Don't turn your back. Watch the corners. Time is running out. I tried recording the sounds at night using my phone's voice memo app. The recordings picked up something. Footsteps, whispers, the dragging of furniture across carpet. But when I checked the apartment in the morning, nothing was out of place. At least not obviously. I started spending more and more time at work, coming home as late as possible, leaving as early as I could. My coworkers noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, my jumpiness, the way I'd zone out during meetings. My boss, a kind but pragmatic woman named Miss Peterson, suggested I take some time off to rest and recharge. I couldn't tell her the truth, that my apartment, my supposed sanctuary, was the last place I wanted to be. 2 months in, I was sitting on my bed, one night, trying to read a book, but really just listening to the sounds of the apartment, when I heard something new, a scratching sound, coming from inside the wall behind my headboard. Not mice. The sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic, like someone dragging their fingernails across the drywall in a slow, deliberate pattern. I pressed my ear against the wall. The scratching stopped. Immediately, then I heard it, breathing, slow, raspy inhales and exhales, coming from just on the other side of the wall. I jerked away, my heart hammering, knocking my bedside lamp to the floor with a crash. The next morning's message was different. They know you heard. I started researching the building's history. It was built in the 1970s, nothing remarkable. No reported deaths, no mysterious disappearances, nothing that would explain any of this. I tried to find previous tenants online, searching through social media, public records, anything I could find. Nothing. The messages grew more specific. Check the air vents. What's behind the mirror? Count your steps at night. They used the pipes. I unscrewed the air vent cover in my room and shone my flashlight inside. The beam revealed nothing but dust and cobwebs, but I could have sworn I heard movement further down the shaft. A sliding, shuffling sound that stopped as soon as I noticed it. The mirror became an obsession. I examined it from every angle, searching for hidden mechanisms, secret compartments, anything that might explain the messages. It was just a normal bathroom mirror, mounted flush against the wall. But when I tapped it, the sound was hollow, like there was space behind it. One evening, I decided to remove the mirror completely. I waited until I heard no movement in the apartment, until I was reasonably sure my roommates, whoever they were either out or asleep. Then, I gathered my tools, a screwdriver, a putty knife, a hammer. The mirror was heavier than I expected. It took some effort to pry it loose from the wall, but finally, with a loud crack, it came free. Behind it was an opening, a rectangular hole, about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high, cut into the wall. The space beyond was dark, but my flashlight beam revealed a narrow passage, extending further back than it should have, given the building's layout. And the walls of the passage, they were covered in writing. Thousands of backwards letters, scratched into the surface, overlapping, intertwining, a chaotic tapestry of words. Some looked fresh, newly carved. Others were old, faded, covered in a layer of dust. I heard movement in the passage, a quick, scuttling sound, like something retreating deeper into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight caught nothing, just shadow. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I quickly remounted the mirror, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, I had to go back. I needed my work clothes, my laptop, some essentials. The message on the mirror was waiting for me. Now you know where we live. I started plotting my escape. I couldn't break the lease without losing my security deposit, and I couldn't afford to pay rent on 2 places. But the messages were getting more frequent, appearing even when the mirror wasn't fogged up. We see you planning. You can't escape US. We're in the walls. We're in the pipes. We're in the vents. We're everywhere. The sounds at night grew louder, the scratching in the walls, the whispers in the vents, the footsteps in the hallway that stopped right outside my bedroom door. I barricaded myself in my room, only leaving for work and essential trips to the bathroom. 3 months after moving in, I woke up at 3 a.m. to silence. Complete, utter silence. The usual ambient sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the heating system, the creaks and groans of the old building were gone. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, straining to hear something, anything. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound, coming from the other side of my bedroom door. Not at the bottom where a mouse might scrabble, but at eye level, like someone or something was writing on the wood. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it at the door. In the beam, I could see letters appearing on the surface, carved into the wood from the outside, appearing stroke by stroke in real time. "We want to meet you." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I went straight to work and started searching for a new apartment. During my lunch break, I found a small studio across town, available immediately. It would require 2 months' rent up front. A significant financial strain, but I didn't care. I went back to the apartment that evening, armed with empty boxes, planning to pack as quickly as possible. The message on the mirror was longer than usual. "You can leave, but we'll follow. We always follow. Ask the others." As I was throwing clothes into boxes, I heard a door open, somewhere in the apartment. Then another. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. Approaching. From both directions. I grabbed my pre-packed emergency bag, a backpack containing essentials I'd prepared weeks earlier, and yanked open my bedroom window. The fire escape was right there, just as I'd planned. I climbed out just as my bedroom door began to open. I didn't look back. I ran down the fire escape, the metal clanging under my feet, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My bedroom window was dark, but I could have sworn I saw faces pressed against the glass. Faces that weren't quite right. Faces that seemed to be made of shadow and mist. I stayed in a hotel that night and hired movers the next day to retrieve my remaining belongings. They reported nothing unusual about the apartment. My roommate's doors were closed, as always. I moved into the studio apartment and tried to put the whole experience behind me. For a week, everything was normal. Then, one morning, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed condensation forming on my new bathroom mirror. Letters began to appear, backwards as always. "Welcome home." I immediately called my landlord and asked about the previous tenants. He sounded confused. The apartment, he said, had been empty for 6 months before I moved in. No one would rent it because of the strange noises in the walls. That night, I heard the first scratch from inside the heating vent. I broke my lease the next day and moved in with a friend across town in Portland. I sleep on his couch and contribute to rent, but I don't care. At least here, the mirrors stay clear and the walls don't whisper. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone in the bathroom, I find myself staring at the mirror, waiting for words to appear. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see letters starting to form in the steam. But I always wipe them away before I can read what they say. I don't want to know if they followed me here. I don't want to know what they want. And most of all, I don't want to know what happened to my old roommates. The ones whose doors were always closed. The ones I never saw. The ones who might not have been there at all. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries should stay buried. In the walls, behind the mirrors, in the spaces we pretend don't exist. But every now and then, when I hear an unexpected sound in the night or catch a movement in my peripheral vision, I remember those backwards letters forming in the steam. They always follow, and I wonder how far I'll have to run before they stop. The clockmaker's curse. The ticking was the first thing I noticed. Not the gentle, rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock, or the hurried ticking of a wristwatch, but a deeper, more resonant sound, a slow, deliberate thump-tick, that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the old house. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and I'm an archivist. I specialize in restoring and preserving historical documents, a profession that often leads me to dusty attics, forgotten archives, and, in this particular case, the abandoned workshop of my great-uncle Silas Blackwood, a renowned clockmaker who disappeared without a trace in 1958. The workshop was located in a small, detached building behind the main house, a rambling Victorian on the outskirts of Arkham, Massachusetts. Silas's house had been in the family for generations, passed down through a line of increasingly eccentric Blackwoods. After my Aunt Silas's niece passed away last spring, the property and all its contents fell to me. I'd spent the past 2 weeks sorting through the house, cataloging its contents, preparing it for sale. The main house was filled with the usual accumulation of a long life, antique furniture, stacks of books, dusty portraits of stern-faced ancestors. But the workshop was different. It was as if time had stopped the moment Silas vanished. Tools lay scattered across the workbench. Half-finished clocks sat on shelves, their intricate gears and springs exposed, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wood shavings, oil, and something else, something metallic, almost coppery. And the ticking, that relentless thump-tick. Thump-tick. I traced the sound to the far corner of the workshop, where a large grandfather clock stood shrouded in a dust-covered sheet. It was an imposing piece, over 7 feet tall, made of dark, intricately carved wood. The pendulum was still, the hands frozen at precisely 3:47. I pulled away the sheet, releasing a cloud of dust that made me cough. The clock's face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Instead of numerals, it had strange symbols, intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and swirl as I looked at them. The pendulum, a heavy brass disc, was etched with similar markings. The thump-tick wasn't coming from the clock itself, but from behind it. I carefully moved the clock away from the wall. It was heavier than it looked, the wood surprisingly cold beneath my fingers, revealing a small, wooden door set into the wall. The door had no handle, no hinges, just a single keyhole-shaped opening. And the thump-tick was definitely coming from behind that door. I searched the workshop for a key, checking drawers, boxes, even the pockets of Silas's old, dust-covered work coat, which still hung on a hook by the entrance. I found nothing that fit. That night, back in the main house, I researched Silas Blackwood. The local historical society had a surprisingly extensive file on him. He was considered a genius, a master craftsman, renowned for his intricate and innovative clockwork designs. But he was also eccentric, reclusive, obsessed with time, with its passage, with its manipulation. The file contained newspaper clippings, letters, journal entries, all painting a picture of a man increasingly consumed by his work, by his increasingly bizarre theories about the nature of time itself. His last journal entry, dated the day before he disappeared, was particularly unsettling. The mechanism is complete, the key almost found. Tonight, I unlocked the gate. Tonight, I stepped beyond. The next morning, I returned to the workshop, armed with a set of lockpicks I'd borrowed from a locksmith friend in town. The thump-tick was still there, steady and insistent. The lock was surprisingly complex, but after almost an hour of painstaking work, I felt a satisfying click. The door swung inward, revealing darkness. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. I pulled out my phone and activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing a staircase. Narrow wooden steps descending steeply into the earth. The thump-tick was louder now, coming from below. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to seal that door, to forget I'd ever found it. But the archivist in me, the historian, the Blackwood, couldn't resist. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step. The scent of wood and oil was replaced by a damp, earthy smell, mixed with that same metallic tang I'd noticed before. The thump-tick grew louder, more insistent, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. The stairs ended in a small, circular chamber. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, damp and glistening. And in the center of the chamber, on a raised stone platform, stood something. It was a clockwork mechanism, unlike anything I'd ever seen. A towering, intricate construction of gears, springs, pendulums, and levers, all made of a dark, unfamiliar metal that seemed to absorb the light. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy the source of the thumptick that filled the chamber. And at the very top of the mechanism, where the clock face should have been, was a mirror. Not a normal mirror, reflecting the room, but a swirling vortex of darkness. A void that seemed to draw the eye inward, towards nothingness. As I stared at the mirror, I heard a voice. Not audible, not in the traditional sense, but a voice inside my head. A whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of my being. Almost, the mechanism pulsed faster. The thumptick intensified. The mirror rippled. I reached out, hesitantly, my fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface of one of the gears. The moment I made contact, the entire mechanism lurched. Gears spun, pendulums swung wildly, levers clicked and clacked in a chaotic, discordant rhythm. The mirror opened, not like a door but like an eye, a vast, black, unblinking eye, staring out from the void. And from within that eye, I saw something. Shapes, forms, shadows, moving too fast to comprehend, too alien to describe. Glimpses of other places, other times, other realities. The voice in my head grew louder, more insistent, almost free. I stumbled backward, my hand flying away from the mechanism. The chaotic movement slowed, the mirror contracted, the eye closing. Using a heavy hammer I found on the workbench, I smashed the lock mechanism to pieces, rendering it unusable. I didn't go back into the workshop after that. I contacted a demolition company and had the entire structure razed to the ground. The earth beneath it salted and sealed with concrete. The main house, I sold it as is, to a young couple from Boston who were charmed by its rustic appeal and historic character. I didn't tell them about the workshop, or the clock, or the thing I'd seen in the mirror. I moved back to my small apartment in the city, surrounded by my books and documents, by the comforting familiarity of the past. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I still hear it. That thumptick, a phantom rhythm, echoing in my memory, a reminder of what lies beneath, of what lies beyond. And I dream of mirrors, of swirling vortexes of darkness, of eyes that open where no eyes should be. I've stopped researching Silas Blackwood. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left unopened. Some clocks should never be wound. But the ticking never stops. And I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that somewhere, in some hidden place, another clock is being built. Another key is being forged. Another gate is waiting to be unlocked. And the thumptick continues, a relentless countdown to a moment I pray I never witness. The moment when time breaks. Highway collision and robbery. The back roads of rural Virginia were dark and desolate. The only illumination coming from the intermittent glow of the moon and the headlights of 29-year-old Mark's aging sedan. He was on his way to meet a woman he'd connected with on Craigslist, a rendezvous arranged with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He was a bit of a loner, and online dating was his primary means of meeting people. The drive was long and uneventful, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. He was driving faster than he should have been, fueled by a nervous energy and a desire to reach his destination. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure darted across the road, directly in front of his car. Mark slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching in protest, his heart leaping into his throat. He swerved violently, trying to avoid a collision, but it was too late. He saw in a fleeting, horrifying instant that there were two figures. The first one, the one he'd initially seen, managed to scramble out of the way. But the second one, who had been chasing the first, was caught in the path of his swerving car. There was a sickening thud, a sickening crunch of metal against flesh and bone. Mark's car spun sideways, coming to rest on the shoulder of the road, facing the opposite direction. He sat there for a moment, stunned and disoriented, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, his body trembling. He'd hit someone. He scrambled out of the car, his legs shaky, his mind racing. The first figure, the one he'd initially tried to avoid, was gone, vanished into the darkness. The second figure lay on the ground, a crumpled heap of limbs and clothing. Mark rushed to the man's side, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt down, his hands hovering over the man's body, afraid to touch him. "Hey, are you okay?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. The man groaned, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was alive, thank God, but he was clearly injured. Mark pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the keypad. He needed to call 911 to get help. As he was typing in the number, the man suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse and strained.
No.
Don't call anyone. Don't call the cops." Mark hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. He looked at the man, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone's flashlight. He was wearing layers of tattered clothing, his arms covered in scrapes and bruises. He looked like he was homeless, living on the streets. "Can you stand?" Mark asked, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and confusion. The man slowly, painfully, pushed himself up into a sitting position. He winced, clutching his side. He had a slight limp, but he seemed to be able to stand. "I'm fine," the man said, his voice still raspy. Do you have any cigarettes?" Mark, relieved that the man seemed to be relatively okay, nodded. "Yeah, I think so. Let me get them." He walked back to his car, his mind still reeling from the shock of the collision. He opened the glove compartment and retrieved a pack of cigarettes, a relic from a time when he'd occasionally smoked with a coworker. He returned to the man, handing him the cigarettes and offering him a light. As the man lit his cigarette, his face illuminated by the flickering flame, Mark asked, "Who was that other guy? The one you were chasing?" The man took a long drag of his cigarette, his eyes fixed on the ground. Someone stole my backpack. When I was sleeping." Mark felt a surge of sympathy for the man. He was clearly down on his luck, living a hard life on the streets. He felt a pang of guilt for hitting him, even though it had been an accident. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. He intended to give the man all the cash he had, a small gesture of compensation for the pain and suffering he'd caused. "Are you sure you don't want me to call an ambulance?" Mark asked, his voice filled with concern. "You might have some internal injuries. That's when it happened." A sudden, blinding pain exploded in Mark's face. He staggered backward, his vision blurring, his head ringing. He felt a sharp, stinging sensation on his cheek, the taste of blood in his mouth. He stumbled, his legs giving way beneath him. He fell to the ground, his head hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. When he regained consciousness, his head was throbbing, his vision still blurry. He looked around, disoriented and confused. His car was gone. The homeless man he'd hit, had punched him, stolen his car, and left him stranded on the side of a deserted road in the middle of the night. Mark sat there, in shock, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He reached for his phone, his first instinct to call for help. But then he remembered. He'd left it in the car, charging. He reached under his jacket, his hand instinctively going to the holster where he kept his handgun. He felt a wave of relief as his fingers closed around the familiar grip of the weapon. At least he wasn't completely defenseless. He started walking, his legs heavy, his head pounding. He walked for what felt like hours, the darkness pressing in on him, the silence broken only by the sound of his own footsteps and the occasional howl of a distant dog. Finally, he saw it, a faint glow in the distance. As he got closer, he realized it was a roadside rest stop, a small, concrete building with a few vending machines and restrooms. And parked in front of the rest stop, illuminated by the flickering fluorescent lights, was his car. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered through the window. The man, the thief, was asleep in the driver's seat, his head slumped against the steering wheel. Mark's first instinct was to call the police, but then he hesitated. He'd hit the man with his car. He'd pulled a gun on him. The legality of the situation was murky, at best. He was also very worried about his gun. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He tried the car doors. They were all locked. He looked around, searching for something to break the window. He found nothing. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. He removed his jacket, wrapping it around his hand to protect it from the shattered glass. He raised his fist and smashed it through the driver's side window. The glass shattered with a loud, explosive sound. The man jerked awake, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Mark reached through the broken window, unlocking the door. He yanked the door open, pointing his gun directly at the man's head. "Get out of the car," Mark said, his voice cold and hard. The man, trembling and stammering, begged for his life. "Please, don't shoot me. Please." Mark, his anger fueled by adrenaline and a sense of righteous indignation, ignored his pleas. "Get out of the car and walk towards that wall," he ordered, gesturing towards the rest stop building. "Turn around and face the wall." The man complied, his movements slow and hesitant. Mark retrieved his keys from the man's pocket. He got back in his car, his hands still shaking, his heart still pounding. He drove away, leaving the man stranded at the rest stop, the shattered window a testament to the chaotic, terrifying events of the night. He never reported the incident to the police, fearing the legal repercussions. He never saw the man again, never learned his name, never understood his motives. The encounter remained a chilling, unresolved mystery, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life, the dangers that lurked in the darkness, and the desperate measures people would take to survive. Grinder's grim grin. 22-year-old Leo considered himself fairly open-minded and adventurous when it came to dating. He'd been using Grindr, a popular dating app for gay men, for a while with varying degrees of success. He'd met some interesting people, had some fun dates, and even formed a few short-lived relationships. But he was still searching for something more, something lasting. One day, while browsing through the app, he received a message from a user named Brian89. Leo clicked on the profile. Brian's pictures showed a handsome, clean-cut guy with dark, neatly styled hair, intelligent eyes, and a warm, inviting smile. His bio was witty and engaging, hinting at a shared love of books, movies, and outdoor adventures. Leo was intrigued. He responded to Brian's message, and they quickly struck up a conversation. Brian was charming, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Leo. They chatted for hours, exchanging messages about their lives, their interests, their hopes, and their dreams. After a few days of constant communication, they exchanged phone numbers. Leo found himself looking forward to Brian's texts, his witty banter and thoughtful questions brightening his days. Brian seemed almost too good to be true, handsome, intelligent, funny, and seemingly emotionally available. Leo, eager to see if the online chemistry translated into real-life attraction, suggested they meet for a date. He proposed grabbing lattes at his favorite local coffee shop, a cozy, independent place with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture. Brian readily agreed. They set a date for the following evening. Around 6 p.m. on the day of the date, Leo sent Brian a text, letting him know he was leaving his apartment. Brian responded with a simple, "Can't wait to meet you," smiley face. Leo smiled. He was genuinely excited about this date. He had a good feeling about Brian. Then his phone rang. It was Brian. Leo answered, his voice filled with anticipation. "Hey Brian, what's up?" "Hey," Brian said, his voice sounding different than Leo had imagined. It was deeper, more hesitant, almost strained. "Quick change of plans. I'm feeling kind of tired tonight. Would you mind if we just stayed in at my place? We could watch some shows, order some takeout?" Leo hesitated. He'd been looking forward to going out, to getting to know Brian in a public setting. He preferred first dates to be in neutral territory, a safety precaution he'd learned from experience. "I mean, I was kind of hoping we could go out," Leo said, trying to keep his voice light and casual. "Oh, come on," Brian said, his tone shifting abruptly. "Don't be such a buzzkill. Just come over." I promise you won't be disappointed. There was something in Brian's voice, a subtle undercurrent of impatience, of pressure, that made Leo uneasy. His gut instinct, that little voice that had warned him in the past, was screaming at him to decline, to make an excuse to postpone the date. But he ignored it. He rationalized his unease, telling himself he was just being paranoid. Maybe Brian was just having a bad day. Maybe he was genuinely tired. Okay, Leo said reluctantly. Sure, I'll come over. He drove to Brian's address, his apprehension growing with each passing mile. He tried to reassure himself, to focus on the positive aspects of their online interactions, the witty banter, the shared interests. He pulled into Brian's driveway, a modest house in a quiet, residential neighborhood. Brian was waiting for him at the door, his smile wide and welcoming. He looked just like his pictures, handsome, charming, with a kind of boyish charm that instantly put Leo at ease. As they stepped inside, Leo was greeted by the sight of another man, sprawled on the living room couch, engrossed in a video game. Brian introduced him as his roommate, Mark. Leo, wanting to be polite, attempted to engage Mark in conversation. He introduced himself, asked about the game he was playing, Dark Souls apparently, but Mark barely acknowledged him, his eyes glued to the screen. Brian, seemingly impatient, called Leo's name, beckoning him towards his bedroom. Leo, feeling a bit awkward, excused himself and followed Brian down the hallway. He stepped into Brian's bedroom and froze. The room was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was dimly lit, the only sources of light being a series of flickering candles scattered around the room. And on every available surface, on the shelves, on the desk, on the floor, were altars. Not the kind of altars you'd see in a church. These were different, strange, unsettling arrangements of objects, animal bones, dried herbs, jars filled with murky liquids, crystals, and figurines that seemed to depict ancient, pagan deities. One altar on the floor featured a glass container filled with a yellowish liquid, surrounded by what appeared to be animal skulls. Another, on a shelf near the bed, displayed a doll with its eyes sewn shut and its hands missing. A dagger, its blade gleaming in the candlelight, lay next to a cat's skull. Leo felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He felt like he'd stepped into a horror movie, a scene of occult rituals and dark magic. He wanted to run, to turn around and flee, to get as far away from this place as possible. But he was frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He tried to remain calm, to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe Brian was just interested in Wicca or some other alternative religion. Maybe these were just harmless decorations, expressions of his personal beliefs. What are all these? Leo asked, his voice trembling slightly. Brian, who had been standing by the window, turned to face him. His expression was unreadable. I'll tell you about them later, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Leo, his unease growing, pointed to one of the altars, the one with the doll. What's that one for? Brian's face darkened. He scowled at Leo, his eyes narrowing. Don't touch that, he snapped, his voice sharp and angry. Leo recoiled, startled by the sudden outburst. He hadn't even been close to touching the altar, had merely gestured towards it. I'm sorry, Leo stammered, feeling confused and intimidated. I didn't mean to. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, Brian's anger vanished. He smiled, a wide, disarming smile that seemed completely at odds with his previous outburst. He walked over to Leo, placing a hand on his arm. It's okay, he said, his voice soft and soothing. Just don't touch anything. Come on, let's sit down and watch something. He gestured towards the bed, where a laptop sat open, displaying the Netflix home screen. Leo, his mind reeling, reluctantly sat down on the bed. He felt trapped, unsure of what to do, how to react. Brian's mood swings were unsettling, unpredictable. They started watching a show, a random comedy that Leo couldn't focus on. He kept glancing around the room, at the strange altars, at the flickering candles, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. He suggested that they invite Brian's roommate, Mark, to join them. He hoped that the presence of another person would ease the tension, make the situation feel less intense. But Brian immediately shut down the idea. His face darkened again, his eyes flashing with anger. "No," he said, his voice sharp. "I can't stand that guy. He's a loser, a slob. I don't want him in here." The sudden shift in his demeanor was jarring. One moment, he was charming and affable. The next, he was seething with anger. He turned his attention back to Leo, his mood shifting again. He started talking about how attractive he found Leo, how much he'd been looking forward to meeting him. His hand moved to Leo's thigh, his fingers grazing the fabric of his jeans. Leo, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, excused himself, saying he needed to get a glass of water. He stood up, and as he did, Brian reached out and slapped his butt, hard. "Don't take too long," Brian said, his voice laced with a suggestive tone. Leo walked out of the room, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He needed to get out of there. He needed to escape. He went to the kitchen, ostensibly to get a glass of water, but his real intention was to find an excuse to leave. He hoped to run into Mark, the roommate, to perhaps ask him a few discreet questions about Brian. But Mark was asleep on the couch, snoring loudly. Leo filled a glass with water, his hands trembling. He considered simply walking out the front door, making a run for it. But a new fear gripped him. What if Brian was involved in something dangerous? What if those altars weren't just decorations? What if he was capable of something worse? He decided to play it safe. He would go back to the bedroom, make an excuse, and leave as quickly and politely as possible. He returned to the bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Brian sitting on the bed, his legs crossed, his eyes closed. His lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. He was chanting, or praying, or something. Leo was terrified. He called Brian's name, but he didn't respond. He called again, louder this time. Brian opened his eyes, uncrossed his legs, and turned to face Leo. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been sitting there moments before, engaged in some kind of silent ritual. "What's up?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Leo, his nerves frayed, couldn't take it anymore. I'm not feeling well," he said, his voice trembling. "I think I need to go home." Brian's face fell. He tried to convince Leo to stay, his voice pleading, insistent. But Leo was resolute. He stood firm, repeating that he needed to leave. Finally, Brian relented, his expression shifting to one of disappointment and frustration. He walked Leo to the door, his hand lingering on his back, a touch that felt more possessive than affectionate. "I'll text you," Leo said, forcing a smile. He got into his car, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. He drove away, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He blocked Brian's number, deleted his profile from Grindr, and tried to put the entire terrifying experience behind him. But the memory of that night, the strange altars, the unsettling mood swings, the feeling of being trapped in a horror movie, lingered. He hoped to never hear from him again. The midnight congregation. The chilling slice of Jenny's words pierced through my slumber. "No, please, don't touch me." Her voice, a desperate whisper, pulled me from the depths of sleep. My eyes snapped open in the suffocating darkness of our shared bedroom. Beside me, my wife, Eleanor, thrashed in the throes of a nightmare, her face contorted in a mask of terror. The only sound in the room was the gentle whir of the ceiling fan, a rhythmic drone that did little to calm my racing pulse. Then I noticed it, the blankets at the foot of our bed, a heavy, quilted comforter lifted slightly, as though an unseen hand were gently tugging them upwards. It wasn't the fan. The movement was too deliberate, too focused. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. A distinct depression formed in the mattress, as if someone or something had settled there. their weight causing the entire bed frame to shift minutely. "Stay back," Eleanor mumbled, her head tossing restlessly on the pillow. Her eyes remained closed, but her fingers, long and elegant, clenched the bedsheets with surprising strength. I felt a paralyzing fear grip me, a primal terror that rooted me to the spot. My throat constricted, as if an invisible hand were choking me. I wanted to scream, to wake Eleanor, to break the spell of this horrifying scene, but my body refused to obey. The depression in the mattress deepened. Whatever presence had invaded our room was growing heavier, more substantial. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the room in a fleeting arc of illumination. Through the slatted blinds, a shadow flickered at the foot of the bed, a darker patch of darkness where no shadow should exist. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the unsettling sight of the blankets, still drawn upwards in that unnatural, taunting way. My hands, now trembling uncontrollably, reached for the bedside lamp. I had to confirm what my terrified mind was screaming at me. But before my fingers could grasp the switch, Eleanor's body stiffened beside me, every muscle taut as a drawn bowstring. "Get out!" she cried out in her sleep, her voice transformed. The fear had been replaced by a chilling, authoritative anger. "This isn't your place. You need to leave." As if obeying her command, the depression on the mattress vanished. The blankets settled back into place, restoring a semblance of normalcy. But the temperature in the room plummeted. It was a sudden, shocking drop, so drastic that I could see my own breath clouding in the frigid air. Eleanor's eyes flew open. She sat up with a gasp, her gaze darting around the room before finally settling on my face. "Richard, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep, but laced with a growing unease. "Your wife is a sheet," I whispered. The words were meant as a nervous joke, a way to deflect the terror that still clung to me. But as I recounted what I had witnessed, watching Eleanor's expression morph from confusion to dawning horror, the reality of the situation solidified. She remembered fragments of her dream, a twisted, distorted version of her deceased grandmother, not the loving woman she remembered from childhood, but a menacing figure attempting to climb into our bed. Sleep was impossible for the rest of the night. We sat huddled together in the living room, all the lights blazing, fueled by strong, bitter coffee and the shared, unspoken knowledge that what we had experienced was no ordinary dream. Something had been in our room that night, something unseen, something other. It was hold its breath and waiting. The following days were a blur of nervous tension. The nights were the worst, filled with a suffocating quiet that felt more menacing than any sound. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Eleanor, increasingly reliant on sleeping pills, tossed and turned, her face etched with a constant frown, even in slumber. She muttered in her sleep, fragmented phrases escaping her lips. "Cold, so cold," and "go away." Evidence that the nightmares persisted, despite the medication. Driven by a desperate need to regain control, I took action. I installed a motion-activated security camera at the foot of our bed, its infrared light a silent sentinel in the darkness. The first 2 nights, the camera's footage revealed nothing out of the ordinary, just the mundane stillness of our bedroom. But on the 3rd night, precisely at 3:47 a.m., the camera's infrared light flickered to life, triggered by movement. My heart pounded as I watched the playback. The blankets, our familiar, comforting comforter, were moving. They rose and fell, not in the random patterns of someone sleeping beneath them, but with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if a large, unseen entity were breathing underneath. The temperature reading in the corner of the frame, normally a steady 72 degrees Fahrenheit, plummeted to a chilling 45 degrees in less than a minute. I chose not to show Eleanor the footage. Her fragile sleep was already fragmented enough. I couldn't bear to add another layer of fear to her already burdened mind. Instead, I immersed myself in research, devouring everything I could find on sleep paralysis, shared dreaming, and paranormal encounters. Most of it was useless, filled with pseudoscientific explanations and unsubstantiated anecdotes. But one account, buried deep in an obscure online forum, resonated with an unsettling familiarity. A woman in rural Oregon described an almost identical experience. It had begun after her mother's death, she wrote. A presence would sit on her bed every night at the same precise time. It never physically harmed her, but it exuded an aura of intense waiting, as if anticipating some unknown event. She had finally, desperately, sought the help of a local priest who had performed a blessing on her house. The presence, she claimed, had vanished after that. I was not a religious man. My upbringing had been secular, my worldview grounded in logic and reason. But desperation had a way of eroding even the most deeply held beliefs. I found myself dialing the numbers of local churches, my voice trembling as I explained my situation to a series of increasingly skeptical receptionists. Finally, I connected with Father Michael, an elderly priest with a kind voice and a surprisingly open mind. He listened patiently to my story, his silence punctuated only by the occasional, thoughtful Father Michael arrived at our house the next day, a small, unassuming man carrying a worn leather bag. He walked through each room with a quiet, deliberate pace, sprinkling holy water from a small silver vial and reciting prayers in Latin. His voice a low, resonant murmur. When he reached our bedroom, he paused at the foot of the bed. His hands, gnarled with age, trembled slightly as he made the sign of the cross. "There was something here," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the spot where the depression had formed on the mattress. "Something old, but it's not malevolent, just lost." Sometimes, spirits become disoriented, especially if they had a strong attachment to a place or a person in their earthly life. That night, Eleanor had another dream, but this time her voice, when she spoke in her sleep, was calm, almost soothing. "It's okay," she murmured. "I understand now. You can go home." The temperature in the room dropped again, but not with the same bone-chilling intensity as before. A gentle breeze, seemingly out of nowhere, stirred the curtains. Felt like someone or something brushing past me in a hurry. Then, Eleanor sighed deeply in her sleep, her body relaxing for the first time in weeks. We never felt the presence again. The next morning, Eleanor remembered more of her dream. This time, it was her real grandmother, the loving woman she remembered from her childhood. Her grandmother, she said, had explained that the spirit wasn't trying to harm us. It was the spirit of a woman named Agnes, who had lived in our house decades earlier. In her final years, Agnes had suffered from severe dementia. She would often become confused, wandering into the wrong rooms, even after being moved to a care facility. After her death, Agnes's spirit had continued to return to what she believed was her bedroom, disoriented and bewildered by the presence of strangers in her space. Eleanor's grandmother, acting as a spiritual guide, had helped Agnes remember who she was, had gently led her away from the house, towards somewhere else. I still have the video footage from that last night. If you watch closely, at the moment Eleanor speaks in her sleep, you can see two faint sets of footprints briefly form in the carpet, then fade away. One set is shuffling, hesitant, the other firm and purposeful, leading the first towards the hallway, towards the front door, towards somewhere beyond our understanding. The footprints is leading to the doorway. We decided to keep the house. There was a sense of peace now, a quiet understanding that had settled over us. But we couldn't leave the bedroom as it was. Felt tainted somehow. So we rearranged the furniture. The bed, once facing the window, was now positioned against a different wall. We repainted the room, choosing a soft, calming shade of blue, a stark contrast to the previous, sterile white. It wasn't about trying to ward off spirits. We weren't afraid anymore. It was about reclaiming the space, making it truly ours. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I'd find myself thinking about Agnes, the confused spirit who had once shared our room. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, a lost soul trapped in a loop of disorientation. and I felt a profound gratitude for Eleanor's grandmother, for her intercession, for her kindness in guiding Agnes towards peace. It would have been easy to frame this experience as a typical ghost story, to focus on the terror and uncertainty we had initially felt. But in the end, it wasn't a story about fear. It was a story about compassion, about empathy, about helping a lost soul find its way home. Eleanor's nightmares ceased completely. She slept soundly, her breathing deep and even. The foot of our bed remained undisturbed, a testament to the newfound tranquility in our room. But every now and then, when I'd wake up at precisely 3:47 a.m., I'd whisper a quiet thank you into the darkness, a silent acknowledgement of both grandmothers, the one who had helped and the one who had needed help. Then, I'd roll over and fall back asleep, secure in the knowledge that our room finally belonged only to us. The motion sensor camera remained in place. It continued its silent vigil, its red light blinking steadily in the corner of the room. It hadn't detected any unusual movement in months. The temperature remained stable, the air free of any unexplained chills. The only movements in our bedroom were the ordinary ones, the subtle shifting of blankets as we breathed, the occasional prowl of our two cats, Jasper and Luna, across the foot of the bed, the shadows cast by passing cars outside. Life had returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after experiencing something so profoundly inexplicable. We didn't speak about it often, Eleanor and I, but the memory remained, a shared secret that had subtly altered our perception of the world. How could it not? Some experiences, however brief, leave an indelible mark, a quiet understanding that there are forces, energies, dimensions beyond our everyday comprehension. I still woke up occasionally in the dead of night, my heart racing, remnants of half-remembered dreams clinging to the edges of my consciousness. But now, instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the unknown. The foot of our bed was just the foot of our bed, no mysterious depressions, no unsettling movements. Eleanor, too, seemed to have found her peace. She told me she sometimes dreamed of her grandmother, but the dreams were comforting now. They'd sit together in a sun-drenched kitchen, sipping tea and talking about mundane, everyday things. When she woke up, she'd smile and squeeze my hand, a silent affirmation of the connection that had helped us navigate those strange, dark nights. We had learned to live with the memory, to integrate it into the fabric of our lives. We had accepted that there were things in this world we might never fully understand, but that acceptance didn't breed fear. It fostered a sense of wonder, a quiet respect for the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of our perception. And perhaps most importantly, we had learned that even in the darkest, most terrifying moments, there was always a path back to the light, a way to find peace, even in the face of the inexplicable. The motion sensor camera, a relic of those unsettling weeks, remained. I thought about taking it down, dismantling it, storing it away in the attic. But I didn't. It served as a reminder, not of fear, but of resilience, of the strength we had found in each other, and of the unexpected kindness that had ultimately resolved our haunting. It reminded us that even in our most rational scientific moments, we should remain open to the possibility of the extraordinary, to the whispers of the unseen world. Our bedroom was different now. It was truly our space, filled with our memories, our life. The lingering confusion of Agnes's spirit was gone, replaced by the comfortable familiarity of our shared existence. And if, sometimes late at night, I thought I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, or felt a fleeting chill in the air, I didn't panic. I listened to Eleanor's steady breathing beside me, watched the moonlight paint patterns on our walls, and remembered that every story, even the strangest ones, eventually finds its resolution. Our ghost story, if you could even call it that, hadn't ended with terror or tragedy. It had ended with understanding, with compassion, with a quiet, profound peace. The digital clock on my nightstand continued to glow in the darkness, marking the passage of time. But 3:47 a.m. was no longer a time of dread. It was just another moment, no more or less significant than any other. And that, perhaps, was the greatest peace of all, knowing that even the most haunting moments could fade into memory, leaving us changed but not broken. Life went on in our house, in our room, in our hearts. We woke up each morning, made coffee, went to work, came home, and slept in our bed without fear. The only presence in our room now was our own, and that, we had come to realize, was exactly how it should be. The unseen presence. When Sarah was 27, she enjoyed a night out with her friends in the bustling downtown area. Living alone, she often felt a twinge of vulnerability during late-night returns. On this particular night, as her friend, Lisa, dropped her off around midnight, a profound sense of unease washed over her. Lisa sped off immediately, and as Sarah approached her front door, the feeling intensified, an unshakable sensation that someone was inside her house. She paused at the threshold, a debate raging within her. Was she simply being overly cautious, letting her imagination run wild? Yet the feeling was too potent to ignore. Sarah tried to recall if she had left any lights on, a habit she rarely followed. She was always forgetting, but, to her growing alarm, she realized every light in her house was off, a stark contrast to her usual forgetfulness. Every bulb was off, every lamp went dark. A shiver ran down her spine. Sarah abruptly turned, walking away from her house and around the corner, heading down the sidewalk. Lisa's place was only 8 blocks away, and she decided to seek refuge there. It was a relief to think that she wasn't alone. However, her relief was short-lived. As she walked, the distinct awareness of someone following her crept into her consciousness. A glance back revealed a dark, looming shape, the silhouette of a tall man. The lateness of the hour, combined with the deserted streets, sent a wave of terror through her. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. She considered sprinting, but the thought of making her fear so obvious paralyzed her. Instead, she settled for a brisk pace, her ears straining to catch the sounds behind her. The footsteps seemed to match her increased speed, yet the figure wasn't running, adding to the chilling atmosphere. Reaching Lisa's house, Sarah's heart plummeted. Lisa's car was missing from the driveway, and the house was shrouded in darkness. A feeling of despair washed over her. Turning, she saw the man standing on the corner of the intersection she had just crossed, his gaze fixed on her. She froze, locked in a silent, terrifying standoff. Time seemed to stretch into an eternity before he finally turned and vanished behind some bushes. Seizing the opportunity, Sarah ran. She knew an alternate route home, and she didn't stop sprinting until she reached her front door. To her horror, it stood wide open, confirming her deepest fears. The record store regular. In the vibrant music scene of 1990s Los Angeles, Emily worked at a renowned record store, a haven for music lovers of all kinds. Among the store's regulars was a young man in his early 20s, named Kevin. Kevin frequently engaged Emily in conversations about music, showing a keen interest in her recommendations. One day, during a casual chat, Kevin let slip a detail about Emily's personal life, a detail she had never shared with him. Emily initially dismissed it, attributing it to her coworkers, who might have mentioned something to Kevin, given his frequent visits. However, a seed of unease had been planted. A week later, fate seemed to conspire against her. While driving home, Emily's car broke down in the sweltering heat. Forced to walk several miles, she finally reached a payphone outside an elementary school. She called a cab, the relief of securing a ride washing over her. As she sat waiting, the payphone suddenly rang. Answering it, she heard a chilling voice on the other end. "Bad luck about your car. Talk to me until your ride gets there." The voice was unmistakably Kevin's. A wave of terror washed over Emily. He had followed her, trailed her from the car, and somehow discovered the payphone number, a feat in an era before widespread cell phone use. Across the street, a gas station and a grocery store offered potential refuge. She thought of running there, but felt glued to her spot, mortified. Within 48 hours, Emily had quit her job and moved back in with her parents, a drastic measure fueled by the undeniable fear that gripped her. Months later, during a visit to her old workplace, her former coworkers shared a chilling piece of news. A recent kidnapping had occurred right outside the store, adding a layer of dread to Emily's already unsettling experience. The echo of laughter. The first time I heard it, the sound cut through the mundane afternoon like a shard of ice. I was meticulously, as always, cleaning the kitchen cabinets in my small, isolated house on the outskirts of Bangor, Maine. My name is Arthur Finch, and I'd moved here 8 months prior, seeking solace and solitude after a messy, painful separation from my wife, Beatrice. Beatrice used to tease me, not unkindly, but persistently, about my obsessive need for order. The house, after the divorce, felt cavernously empty, the silence punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant cry of gulls. The cleaning, the organizing, it was a way to fill the void, to keep the memories, the regrets at bay. I had just finished wiping down the inside of the upper cabinets, the scent of lemon cleaner sharp in the air, when the laughter erupted. It wasn't joyful, light-hearted laughter. It was wrong, deep, guttural, and somehow wet. It sounded as if it were coming from the detached garage, connected to the house by a covered breezeway. The previous owner, a retired carpenter named Mr. Abernathy, had used it as a workshop. My hand froze on the cabinet door, my heart leaping into my throat. No one should have been in the garage. I lived alone. My nearest neighbor, a Mrs. O'Connell, lived a good half-mile down the winding, tree-lined road. The laughter came again, louder this time, more prolonged. It built into a horrifying, gurgling chuckle, like someone choking while simultaneously trying to force out a laugh. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was a liquid sound, a sound that spoke of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept leaning against the refrigerator, a relic from my college days, more for comfort than actual security. The weight of it in my hand felt strangely reassuring. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic tattoo against the silence of the house. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to inject a note of authority into my voice, which trembled betrayingly. "I'm armed, and I've called the police." The lie was instinctive, a desperate attempt to project strength I didn't feel. The laughter abruptly ceased. I stood there, counting my breaths, the silence pressing in on me. My hand, slick with sweat, tightened around the bat handle. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door leading to the breezeway. I turned the knob, the metallic click echoing in the quiet kitchen, and yanked the door open, bat raised, ready to strike. The garage was empty. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the workbench, the neatly hung tools, the stacks of boxes containing holiday decorations, remnants of a life I hadn't yet fully unpacked. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints marred the layer of dust on the concrete floor. No sign of anyone having been there. I checked behind every box under the workbench, inside the small storage closet. Nothing. The side door, leading to the overgrown backyard, was still securely locked from the inside. The windows were sealed shut. "Must be hearing things," I muttered, lowering the bat, a wave of shame washing over me. Working too hard. I went back inside, double-checking the locks on all the doors and windows, a ritual I performed with almost religious fervor every night. But the sound, that horrible, wet laughter, lingered in my mind, a discordant note that refused to fade. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. I finished cleaning the kitchen, cooked a solitary dinner, and watched a mindless television show, trying to distract myself. By bedtime, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined the whole episode. Stress, isolation, the echoes of a broken marriage. They could play tricks on the mind, couldn't they? Sleep came eventually, a fitful, shallow slumber. But it didn't last. At precisely 2:07 a.m., the sound ripped me from sleep. The same laughter, but closer now, much closer. It was coming from the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. My body went rigid beneath the covers. Sweat beaded on my forehead, despite the cool air circulating from the ceiling fan. The laughter came again, wet and gurgling, laced with a chilling amusement that sent shivers down my spine. It was as if someone or something was drowning in their own mirth, a horrifying, grotesque parody of joy. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My eyes were fixed on the thin strip of darkness visible under the bedroom door. A shadow flickered across that strip, a fleeting movement that confirmed my worst fears. Something was out there. The floorboards outside my door creaked, a subtle but unmistakable sound. Another laugh, closer still, right at my door. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, agonizingly slowly. I lunged for the bedside lamp, my fingers fumbling with the switch in a desperate, clumsy motion. Light flooded the room, a harsh, fluorescent glare that banished the shadows, at least the visible ones. The doorknob stopped turning. The laughter ceased, abruptly cut off, as if a switch had been flipped. My heart hammered against my ribs, so loud I could feel the pulse in my throat. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I pulled up the flashlight app, the beam a weak, wavering circle in the suddenly bright room. The baseball bat was downstairs, in the kitchen. A wave of self-recrimination washed over me. Stupid, I thought. I should have brought it up. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the door, the phone clutched tightly in my sweaty palm. The silence stretched out, taut and expectant, broken only by my own ragged breathing. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. The motion-activated nightlight cast a pale, bluish glow over the hardwood floor. Nothing moved in the shadows. I checked every room upstairs, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, the small, and used office, finding nothing. Then, my heart pounding with a renewed surge of dread, I went downstairs. Every lock was secure. The alarm system panel showed no signs of intrusion. But I knew what I had heard. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I spent the remainder of the night in the living room, every light blazing, the baseball bat clutched across my lap. I jumped at every creak and groan of the old house settling, my nerves frayed and raw. Sleep was impossible. Morning eventually arrived, a pale, watery dawn that did little to dispel the lingering fear. In the harsh light of day, I felt a surge of foolish embarrassment, stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind. That's all it was. I needed to get out more, to socialize, to reconnect with the world. Maybe even start dating again. The thought brought a faint, bitter smile to my lips. I called in sick to work, a rare occurrence for me, and spent the day on a mission of security reinforcement. I installed additional security cameras, covering every angle of the house's exterior. I added motion sensors to the breezeway and the garage. I replaced the old, flimsy locks on the doors with heavy-duty deadbolts, their metallic heft reassuring under my fingers. The hardware store clerk, a young man with a bored expression, gave me a series of increasingly curious looks as he rang up my purchases, but I didn't care. That night, I went through my security ritual with painstaking care. Every lock was double-checked. Every camera was tested. The baseball bat was propped against my nightstand, within easy reach. I left the bedside lamp on, a defiant beacon against the darkness. Sleep came in fits and starts, a restless, uneasy slumber punctuated by sudden awakenings. Every sound, however mundane, the furnace kicking on, branches scratching against the window panes, the ice maker dropping cubes into the tray, jolted me to full alertness, my heart racing. 2:07 a.m., the laughter started again. This time, it was coming from inside my closet. The sound was different now, subtly altered. It was still wet and gurgling, still deeply unsettling, but there was a new edge to it, a predatory quality that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. It sounded hungry. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the closet door. It was closed, but I could see movement in the narrow gap underneath, a shifting of shadows that shouldn't have been there. The laughter grew louder, more insistent, more demanding. The closet door began to vibrate slightly in its frame, a subtle but unmistakable tremor. I grabbed the bat and the phone, backing towards my bedroom door, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped both. The closet door started to open, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to mock my fear. I ran. I fled down the hallway, taking the stairs two at a time, nearly tripping and falling in my blind panic. The laughter followed me, echoing off the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. A suffocating, omnipresent sound. I made it to the kitchen, fumbling for my car keys, my mind racing. I had to get out. I had to escape. The laughter stopped. In the sudden, shocking silence, I heard something else. Something wet hitting the kitchen floor. Slow, heavy drops. Drip, drip, drip. I turned around slowly, reluctantly. The kitchen was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the overhead light. But there, on the linoleum floor, were dark, glistening spots, leading from the hallway doorway to where I stood, frozen in terror. I touched one of the spots with a trembling finger. It was warm and sticky and smelled faintly of something metallic. The laughter erupted again, right next to my ear, hot, wet breath on my neck. I ran out of the house, clad only in my pajamas, jumped into my car, and drove. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner on the edge of town, its fluorescent lights a beacon of normalcy in the pre-dawn darkness. The elderly waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Doris, didn't bat an eye at my disheveled appearance. She simply poured me a cup of coffee, strong and black, and left me alone in a booth, my hands still shaking, my mind reeling from the night's events. I needed a plan and people. I spent the rest of the night huddled in that diner booth, nursing the lukewarm coffee and trying to formulate a plan. Going back to the house alone was out of the question. I couldn't face that laughter, that presence, again without backup. But who would believe me? Who would take my story seriously? The police would likely dismiss me as a hysterical, sleep-deprived homeowner. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pale pink and orange, I decided on a course of action. I called Michael, my oldest and most trusted friend from college. Mike was a contractor, practical and grounded, the kind of person who could fix anything, solve any problem. He'd even helped me with some minor renovations when I first moved into the house. "Mike," I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep, "I need your help. Something's wrong with the house." Mike listened patiently to my rambling, increasingly frantic explanation, interrupting only occasionally to ask clarifying questions. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He simply listened. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Okay, Arthur," he said finally, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 3 hours." Those 3 hours felt like an eternity. I paced the diner parking lot, replaying the night's events in my head, each replay amplifying my fear and confusion. Mike arrived just before noon, his truck pulling into the driveway with a reassuring crunch of gravel. He stepped out, tall and solid, his presence a welcome anchor in my swirling chaos. "All right, buddy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Let's take a look." We spent the next several hours conducting a thorough, meticulous inspection of the house. We checked every room, every closet, every crawl space. We examined the attic, the basement, even the garage. We found absolutely nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of intruders, no explanation for the laughter, the wet footprints, the shifting shadows. "Could be raccoons in the walls?" Mike suggested, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They can make some pretty weird noises." I didn't argue. How could I explain the feeling of that presence? The wet breath on my neck, the sense of something utterly wrong? Raccoons didn't explain that. Mike, sensing my lingering unease, agreed to stay for a few days just to be sure. We set up makeshift beds in the living room, safety in numbers, a shared vigil against the unknown. The first night passed quietly. So did the second. I started to relax, to hope that whatever had been haunting the house had moved on. Maybe Mike's presence had scared it away. Maybe it had all been a figment of my stressed-out imagination. Then, on the third night, at precisely 2:07 a.m., The laughter started again. It woke us both. Mike sat up on his cot, his eyes wide, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The sound was coming from the kitchen, that horrible, wet, gurgling laugh echoing through the silent house. "You hear it too?" I whispered back, a surge of relief washing over me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. Mike nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the kitchen doorway. "That's not raccoons." We grabbed our phones, their flashlight beams cutting weak circles in the darkness, and the baseball bat which Mike had insisted on bringing inside. Moving slowly, cautiously, we approached the kitchen. The laughter grew louder with each step. The kitchen was dark. The motion sensor light, which I had installed just days earlier, should have activated when we entered, but it remained stubbornly off. The laughter seemed to fill the room now, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint its exact source. Mike reached for the light switch, his fingers fumbling in the darkness. "Nothing," he muttered, his voice tight with tension. "Power's out." Our phone lights carved weak, wavering circles in the darkness. The beams caught something moving near the ceiling, a darker shadow against the shadows, shifting and swirling in a way that defied logic. The laughter stopped. In the sudden, suffocating silence, we heard something else, something dragging itself across the ceiling. Not footsteps, not the scuttling of an animal, but a slow, deliberate dragging sound, accompanied by the faint, wet drip, drip, drip of something liquid. A drop of warm, viscous fluid landed on my shoulder. I flinched, wiping it away with a trembling hand. Felt oily. "Run!" Mike yelled, his voice raw with fear. We bolted for the front door, our footsteps echoing in the sudden chaos. Behind us, the laughter erupted again, closer now, pursuing us, a wave of chilling, mocking sound. We didn't stop running until we reached Mike's truck, its engine roaring to life, tires spitting gravel as we peeled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw something standing in my doorway, a dark, indistinct shape silhouetted against the fainter darkness of the house. It raised one long, impossibly thin arm, as if in farewell. Then it laughed. We drove straight to Mike's house, a small, cozy bungalow several miles outside of town. His wife, Sarah, didn't ask questions when we stumbled in at 3 a.m., our faces pale, our clothes disheveled. She simply made up the guest room and poured us both generous glasses of whiskey. The next day, Mike, leveraging his contacts in the construction and renovation world, called in some favors. A priest came to bless the house, his Latin prayers echoing through the empty rooms. Paranormal investigator, armed with cameras, recording equipment, and an array of sensors, set up shop, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. An elderly woman, who claimed to be as sensitive, walked through the house, burning sage and muttering incantations, her wrinkled face etched with a deep frown. None of them found anything concrete. The cameras showed nothing but ordinary shadows and dust motes. The recordings picked up no ghostly voices, no unexplained sounds. The sensitive simply shook her head and said the house felt heavy, burdened by something she couldn't quite define. But they all agreed on one thing: whatever was in that house wasn't natural. I put the house up for sale the next day. I couldn't face going back there, not even to retrieve my belongings. Let someone else deal with that thing. I moved in with Mike and Sarah temporarily, grateful for their generosity and understanding, while I searched for a new place, something smaller, something closer to town, something normal. The realtor, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named MS Peterson, called a week later, her voice laced with frustration. "Mr. Finch," she said, "we're having some trouble. There's been no interest in the property." "No interest?" I echoed, confused. "But it's a good house in a decent location. The price is competitive." "It's not the price, Mr. Finch," Miss Peterson interrupted. "The house has a reputation. Stories are circulating about strange noises, wet footprints, mysterious laughter, things like that. My stomach sank. The thing in the house, whatever it was, had somehow managed to taint the property, to spread its influence beyond the walls. So here I am, stuck. I'm trapped with a house I can't sell, a house I can't even bring myself to visit. I drive by sometimes, always during daylight hours, always from a safe distance. From the outside, it looks perfectly ordinary. Just another aging New England home, in need of some minor repairs and a fresh coat of paint. But sometimes, when I drive past at night, I see lights flickering inside, even though I know the power has been shut off. And once, just once, I heard that familiar, wet laugh floating on the night air, a chilling reminder of what lurks within those walls. I keep driving now. I don't slow down. I don't look. But sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in that kitchen, watching dark, viscous drops fall from the ceiling, listening to that horrible laughter getting closer and closer. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I wake up at precisely 2:07 a.m., my body drenched in cold sweat, straining my ears, half expecting to hear that sound again, echoing through the silence of my new apartment. So far, it hasn't found me, but I keep the baseball bat next to my bed, just in case. And I never, ever laugh at night anymore. The initial fear has faded, replaced by a weary resignation, a grim acceptance of the fact that I'm tethered to that house, to that thing in some inexplicable way. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away, but the memories are too vivid, too visceral. The wet footprints, the dragging sound, the laughter, they're etched into my mind, a permanent scar on my psyche. I've started seeing a therapist, Dr. Albright, a kind, empathetic woman who specializes in trauma. I haven't told her the full story, of course. I've framed it as a series of stress-induced hallucinations, a manifestation of my anxieties surrounding the divorce and the move. She nods and listens and offers coping mechanisms, but I can see the doubt in her eyes. Mike and Sarah have been incredibly supportive, but even they don't fully understand. They've seen the fear in my eyes, they've heard the tremor in my voice, but they haven't experienced the thing firsthand. They haven't felt that chilling presence, that sense of something fundamentally wrong. I've continued my research sporadically, driven by a need to understand, to find some explanation, however improbable. I've delved into local history, folklore, paranormal accounts, anything that might shed light on what I encountered. I found nothing definitive, just fragments of stories, whispers of unexplained phenomena, hints of something dark and ancient lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary New England town. One recurring theme in my research is the concept of thin places, locations where the veil between our world and something else is thinner, more permeable. Places where the boundaries blur, where the past and the present, the living and the other, can intersect. Could my house be one of those places? Could that thing be something that has seeped through from another dimension, another reality? The thought is terrifying, but it's also strangely compelling. It offers a framework, however flimsy, for understanding the impossible. My car, the one I drove away from the house that night, has been acting strangely lately. The engine makes odd noises, not the usual mechanical sounds, but something different, something that, on quiet nights, sounds almost like footsteps walking downstairs. And sometimes at 2:07 a.m. it sounds a bit like laughter. The watcher in the woods. David sought solace and solitude in a remote cabin nestled at the end of a dirt road in central New Hampshire. The area was known for its reclusive residents, people who valued their privacy above all else. The nearest neighbors were a quarter of a mile away, a distance that usually ensured quiet tranquility. David's cabin was a haven, visited only by the occasional curious animal, bears on the porch, deer in the yard, the usual wildlife encounters. Human visitors were a rarity. One crisp spring morning, as David prepared to leave for work, he noticed something unusual. A late frost had coated the rear window of his truck, and upon closer inspection, he saw a message scrawled in the icy film. "I watch you." The words, clearly written with a finger, sent a chill down his spine. The remainder of his time in the cabin was filled with an underlying sense of unease, a constant awareness of being observed. While he never encountered any further tangible evidence of a human intruder, the chilling message lingered, a constant reminder of the potential threat lurking in the surrounding woods. The idyllic solitude he had sought was now tainted by an unshakable feeling of vulnerability. He started making plans to live elsewhere. The tapping neighbor, Jessica, living alone in her secluded house, had developed a temporary habit that would soon prove to be a source of terror. Having not yet installed a cat door, she had taken to leaving the back sliding door slightly ajar for her cat, Midnight, to come and go. A piece of wood or a baseball bat usually blocked the door, limiting the opening to a mere 6 inches, a seemingly safe measure, given the long driveway and fenced backyard. One stiflingly hot and muggy night, Jessica fell asleep while watching a movie, forgetting to secure the sliding door with the usual barrier. A slightly open curtain allowed a welcome breeze to circulate through the room. Within an hour, a persistent, repetitive tapping at the window jolted her awake. Trying to maintain the pretense of sleep, she cautiously peeked, hoping to see a branch swaying against the glass. Instead, she saw a man standing outside, his gaze fixed on her through the window. The realization that the sliding door, a mere 6 feet away, was unsecured sent a wave of panic through her. A dilemma presented itself. Confront the man and try to bluff her way into locking the door, or continue feigning sleep and risk him discovering the unlocked entrance. The tapping continued, relentless and unnerving, after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 10 minutes. Jessica decided to act. She rose, making her way towards the back door. The man, her neighbor, Mr. Peterson, stopped tapping and met her there. Just before Jessica could slam the door shut, he uttered a chillingly casual question. "What are you watching?" Startled, she responded, Inkheart. Can I join you?" "No," Jessica firmly replied, shutting the door and peering through the window to watch him walk away. That night marked the end of her open-door habit and the beginning of a heightened sense of caution. She would never leave the door unlocked again. The death rattle. 7-year-old Olivia was home sick from school, battling a nasty cold or flu. Her parents, both at work, had arranged for her grandmother, Eleanor, a spry woman nearing 80, to keep her company. Olivia was resting in bed, while Eleanor was somewhere else in the spacious house. Suddenly, the cleaning lady, Mrs. Davison, entered Olivia's bedroom. She sat down heavily on the chair by Olivia's desk, her breathing labored and ragged. Mrs. Davison managed a weak, "Are you feeling any better, dear?" before collapsing sideways onto the desk, her head hitting the surface with a sickening thud. She ended up sprawled awkwardly beneath the table, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. Terror gripped Olivia. She waited, frozen, for a moment or two before cautiously approaching the motionless figure. Just as she neared, she heard a sound she would later learn was called the death rattle, a gurgling, choking noise that emanated from deep within Mrs. Davison's chest. A small amount of vomit escaped her lips. Olivia, panicked and overwhelmed, ran to find her grandmother. Eleanor, upon seeing the scene, swiftly ushered Olivia to a neighbor's house, where she remained until the end of the day, shielded from the grim reality unfolding within her own home. Olivia knew, with a child's intuition, that Mrs. Davison had died. However, her parents maintained a facade for at least a decade, pretending that the cleaning lady had merely fainted. The event left an indelible scar on Olivia's young mind, prompting a swift move from that bedroom. Her younger brother, too young to comprehend the tragedy, inherited the room. But for Olivia, the image of Mrs. Davison's awkward fall and the disturbing sounds she made remained vivid and haunting, a chilling memory etched forever in her mind. The sights and smells still haunted her to this day. The tapping on the window. Years ago, young Michael's parents made a significant renovation to their home, converting the garage into an expansive playroom. This became the central hub for family entertainment, a space filled with games and laughter. At the age of 10, Michael found himself home alone for only the second or third time, his siblings away for various reasons. Naturally, he reveled in the freedom, staying up late into the night, immersed in the world of PlayStation 2. As the night wore on, a subtle tapping sound began to intrude upon his gaming. Initially, he dismissed it as part of the game's soundtrack, but it persisted, a rhythmic drumming of fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, for relentlessly repeating. The sound grew more noticeable when the doorknob rattled, and the tapping shifted to the door itself, amplifying its intensity. Fear gripped Michael. He stealthily approached the door, double-checking the locks. To his dismay, both were unlocked, although the door had a tendency to jam, making it difficult to open without deliberate effort. He loudly engaged both locks, intending to signal to the unseen presence that entry was impossible. But then a gruff, older man's laugh echoed from outside, followed by the tapping sound, now louder and closer, right outside the window. A chilling phrase pierced the night. "Let me in!" Panic seized Michael. He extinguished the light, fleeing to his room and hiding in the impenetrable darkness until his parents returned hours later. He recounted the terrifying experience, and they searched the house and grounds, finding no trace of the intruder. The event remained an unsolved mystery, a source of lingering fear that the unseen visitor might one day return when he was home alone. The sound still echoes to this day. The stairwell watcher. The heat was the first sign. It pressed against my back, a palpable wave of warmth, like standing too close to an open oven. I was scraping away decades-old wallpaper from the wall next to the attic stairs in the house I'd inherited from my great-aunt Mildred. I turned around, expecting to find a malfunctioning space heater or a draft from a broken window. Nothing, just the empty hallway, bathed in the pale afternoon light filtering through the grimy windows and the worn, wooden steps leading upwards to the attic. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the exertion of the renovation work. I'd been at it for hours, stripping away layers of floral patterns and faded stripes, uncovering the bare plaster beneath. It was tedious, dusty work, but it was necessary. The house, a sprawling Victorian in a quiet suburb of Providence, Rhode Island, needed a complete overhaul before I could even think about selling it. I went back to work, my scraper digging into the stubborn wallpaper. The heat returned, stronger this time, accompanied by a distinct pressure between my shoulder blades, as if someone were standing directly behind me, breathing down my neck. I spun around again, faster this time, my heart rate kicking up a notch. Still nothing. The hallway remained empty, silent except for the rustling of the leaves outside. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m., staring at a stack of old family photographs I found in the attic, my hands shaking so badly I can barely hold a pen. The photos, brittle and faded, are spread out before me like a morbid jigsaw puzzle, and I can't stop seeing it. Mildred had left me the house unexpectedly. She'd been the family recluse, the eccentric aunt who lived alone, surrounded by cats and stacks of books. I'd only met her a handful of times as a child, and my memories were hazy. A dimly lit house filled with the scent of mothballs and lavender. A frail woman with piercing blue eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. The house was in a state of disrepair. The wiring was ancient, the plumbing leaky, and every surface was coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. But the property values in the area were soaring, and I, recently laid off from my job as a software engineer, saw it as an opportunity. I could fix it up, sell it, and use the profit to start my own business. The first 2 weeks of the renovation were straightforward. I replaced faulty wiring, patched holes in the plaster, and started the arduous task of stripping away the layers of wallpaper. Then came that day by the attic stairs. After the second time I felt the heat and pressure, I tried to rationalize it. Old houses were full of drafts, I told myself. The uneven heating system was probably to blame. But the sensation persisted, always in the same location, always with the same intensity. It felt personal, like something was watching me, specifically from those stairs. I started avoiding that section of the hallway, taking circuitous routes to reach other rooms. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but the unease remained, a constant, nagging presence at the back of my mind. Last night, I finally forced myself to confront my fear. I needed to check the attic insulation anyway, and I was tired of letting this thing dictate my movements. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and a toolbox and started up the stairs. The heat hit me halfway up, a suffocating wave that made my shirt instantly stick to my back. The pressure followed, so intense I had to grip the railing to keep from stumbling backward. My flashlight beam danced across dusty boxes, discarded furniture, and piles of yellowing newspapers. The air was thick with the scent of decay and dust. I pushed through the discomfort, determined to reach the top. The attic was vast, running the entire length of the house. It was a repository of forgotten memories, trunks overflowing with old clothes, sheet-covered furniture, stacks of magazines and books. I spotted a cardboard box labeled "Family Photos Mildred" and grabbed it, hoping to find some clues about the house's history, something that might guide my renovation efforts. The box was a treasure trove of images, spanning decades. Most were typical family portraits, stiffly posed groups in front of outdated cars, children grinning toothlessly on Christmas morning, awkward teenagers at prom. But then, I found one that made my blood run cold. It was a photograph of the attic stairs, taken from the hallway below. The image was faded and slightly blurry, probably from the 1970s, judging by the hideous avocado green appliances visible in the kitchen. But what caught my eye, what made my heart seize in my chest, was the dark figure standing halfway up the stairs. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But the more I stared, the more distinct it became. It was undeniably human-shaped, but completely black, like a silhouette cut from construction paper. There were no features, no details, just a solid, opaque darkness. And it was facing down towards the camera, as if watching whoever had taken the picture. My hands started shaking. I frantically searched through the rest of the photos, my breath catching in my throat with each new discovery. There were more, many more. Different years, different times of day, different angles. But in every single photograph of those stairs, the dark figure was there. Always in the same spot, always facing down. I found a photo dated 1962, showing a family gathering. The stairs were visible in the background, and there it was, the figure, lurking in the shadows. Another photo, from 1975, showed Mildred's birthday party. The figure stood on the stairs behind a celebrating group, a silent, ominous presence. A Christmas morning photo from 1989, the figure was there, watching the children open presents, a dark counterpoint to the festive scene. Some of the photos had notes scribbled on the back, mostly just dates and names. But one caught my eye. It was another shot of the stairs, this one from 1983. Mildred's handwriting, spidery and faint, read, "It never leaves that spot. I've learned to live with it." I spent the next few hours arranging the photos on the kitchen table, creating a chronological timeline. The figure first appeared in photos from 1960, the year Mildred moved into the house. It was present in every subsequent photograph of the stairs, without exception. Always the same position, always watching. My rational mind struggled to find explanations. A defect in the camera? A prank played by Mildred, stretching across decades? But I knew what I'd felt on those stairs, the heat, the pressure, the undeniable sensation of being observed. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. 2 weeks ago, I'd taken some before pictures to document the renovation progress. I scrolled to the images of the hallway and stairs. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. There it was, the same dark figure, in my photos, in my digital 21st century photos. The sound of creaking wood, coming from upstairs, made me jump. It was the attic stairs. I sat frozen, every muscle tense, listening. The creaking came again, a slow, deliberate sound, like someone shifting their weight on old, worn boards. The kitchen, which had felt relatively normal just moments before, suddenly seemed too exposed, too vulnerable. I grabbed the stack of photos and my phone and retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I even shoved a heavy chair under the doorknob, a futile but instinctive gesture of defense. That was 4 hours ago. I haven't heard any more noises, but I can't bring myself to leave the room. I keep staring at the photos, spread out across my bed like a macabre deck of cards, trying to make sense of them, trying to understand what has been watching me from those attic stairs. The oldest photos, the ones from before Mildred moved in, show the house in its original state, a Grand Victorian, newly built in the 1920s. There's no figure on the stairs in those images, nothing unusual at all. But something changed in 1960. What happened that year? What brought that thing here? I pull up my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, searching through online property records, old newspaper archives, anything that might shed light on the house's history. The records show that Mildred purchased the house in 1960 from the original owners, a family named Henderson. They'd lived there for almost 40 years, seemingly without incident. No reports of strange occurrences, no unexplained deaths, nothing that would suggest a haunting. So the change was linked to Mildred. I dig deeper into her life, searching for any clue, any hint of what might have triggered the appearance of the figure. Mildred was a nurse at the local hospital, Providence General, from 1955 to 1985. She never married, lived alone, kept to herself. A quiet, unremarkable life according to the few records I can find. Then, I stumble upon an article from 1960, a small local news item about a fire at Providence General. 3 people died in the blaze, including a patient named Elias Thorne, who was trapped in his room on the 3rd floor. My heart starts to pound as I read further. Thorne had been a long-term patient, paralyzed from the waist down after a construction accident. He was under Mildred's care. According to the article, Mildred had tried to reach him during the fire, but had been forced back by the intense heat and smoke. She'd watched, helpless, from the stairwell as his room burned. The stairwell. I think about the figure on my attic stairs, the way it always faces down as if watching something below. The heat I feel whenever I get close, the crushing pressure, like someone desperately trying to move, to push through an invisible barrier. The sun is starting to rise, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and pink. In a few hours, I'm supposed to meet with a contractor to discuss replacing the outdated electrical wiring in the upstairs hallway. Part of me wants to cancel, to sell the house immediately, to run as far away from this place as possible. But another part of me, a stubborn, inquisitive part, keeps thinking about Mildred's note. I've learned to live with it. She stayed in this house for over 50 years, sharing it with whatever lurks on those stairs. Did she feel guilty about not saving Elias Thorne? Did she understand that his presence wasn't meant to be menacing, but rather a lingering echo of that tragic night? I look at the most recent photo I took, the one on my phone. The figure is there, clearer than ever, but in the soft morning light, it doesn't seem as frightening. It looks patient, like it's been standing guard all these years, keeping a silent vigil on those steps. I get up and walk to my bedroom door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I can hear the house settling, the usual creaks and groans of old wood. But now there's something else, a subtle presence I hadn't noticed before. Not fear exactly, but awareness, acknowledgement. I unlock the door and step into the hallway. The attic stairs are visible at the end, bathed in the soft morning light. I take a deep breath and start walking towards them. The heat begins almost immediately, but I don't flinch. I don't fight it. I let it wash over me. The pressure builds between my shoulder blades, a heavy, familiar weight. I let it come. I stop at the bottom of the stairs and look up. I can't see anything unusual, but I know it's there. Watching. Waiting. Good morning, I say quietly, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to an empty staircase. I'm going to be working on the wiring today. I hope that's okay. The pressure on my back eases, subtly but perceptibly. The heat softens, becoming a gentle warmth, like sunlight through a window. I take that as a yes. I've been in this house for 6 months now. The renovation is almost complete, but I'm not sure I want to sell anymore. There's something about this place, about the presence that shares it with me. Maybe that's why Mildred left it to me, a distant relative she barely knew. Maybe she knew I'd understand eventually. I head to the kitchen to make coffee, already planning my work for the day. The stairs creak behind me, but I don't turn around. Some things I'm learning are better left unobserved. Some presences are meant to be felt, not seen. The figure will be there when I pass the stairs again, standing its eternal watch. The heat will come and the pressure, and I'll know I'm not alone in this house. It's not exactly comfort, but it's something close to it. A shared vigil, a quiet understanding. I pour my coffee and look out the kitchen window at the rising sun. In a few hours, the contractor will arrive, and I'll have to explain why we need to work around the attic stairs, why that section of the hallway needs to stay exactly as it is. I'm not sure what I'll say. How do you explain sharing your house with a shadow? But that's a problem for later. For now, I sit with my coffee and listen to the old house wake up around me. Somewhere above, on the attic stairs, my unusual housemate keeps its watch. The morning light streams through the windows, and I feel the familiar warmth on my back, constant as a heartbeat, steady as time itself. My hands are still shaking as I type this. I need to get it down while it's fresh in my mind, while I can still remember every detail. It's a way of processing, of making sense of something that defies logic. I'm not sure what the future holds for me and this house, for me and the stairwell watcher. But I know one thing. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm curious. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The contractor is here. Time to get to work. The screaming door. Last year, 25-year-old Isabella found herself renting a house in a small, economically depressed former mining town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. Living alone, she cherished the quiet solitude, especially on the first warm nights of spring. One such night, around 4 a.m., Isabella was jolted awake by the sound of her doorknob turning. Initially, she dismissed it as someone mistaking her house for another. But the persistent turning, the insistent jiggling of the handle, sent a shiver of unease down her spine. Lacking a peephole or a window to identify the visitor, Isabella approached the door from inside and called out, "You have the wrong house." Her voice, though firm, trembled slightly. The response was terrifying. The door began to shake violently, as if something was slamming against it with brute force. Isabella, her heart pounding in her chest, tried again, her voice rising in desperation. "You have the wrong house." A guttural noise, a mix of a growl and a whimper, emanated from the other side of the door. Then, the sound escalated into a series of screams and shrieks, a cacophony of animalistic sounds that chilled Isabella to the bone. Grabbing a kitchen knife, she dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. After what felt like an eternity, a knock on the door announced the arrival of the police. Cautiously, Isabella opened the door, revealing an officer who questioned her about the incident. He then instructed her to close the door and remain inside, a request that heightened her anxiety. Unable to see what was happening outside, Isabella turned off the lights and waited, knife in hand, the silence amplifying her fear. 20 minutes crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, without warning, the living room window screen began to push inward, the curtain rustling as someone attempted to climb inside. Isabella, adrenaline surging through her veins, brandished the knife and yelled, "Get out!" Her voice, though forceful, betrayed the terror that gripped her. Relief flooded her as she heard, "Get on the ground! Show me your hands!" Followed by another horrific wail from outside, presumably as the intruder was tackled and apprehended. A few minutes later, another knock signaled the officer's return. He informed Isabella that the suspect had been captured. The officer, though in uniform, was visibly trembling and pale, his composure shattered by the encounter. The next day, Isabella encountered the same officer, now off duty, in the small town. He revealed that the suspect had claimed his name was Jason Voorhees, a chilling detail that suggested a disturbed mind, possibly fueled by meth or other drugs, a dangerous combination with delusions inspired by slasher films. The unlocked door. Over the past summer, Chloe, a young woman, was living alone in her apartment, situated in a relatively safe college town. Despite the area's reputation, she maintained a cautious approach, always locking her door whenever she returned home, a precaution amplified by the fact that she was a female living on her own. One morning, Chloe woke up to use the bathroom. As she was inside, she heard the distinct creak of the front door opening. Fear instantly gripped her. Carefully, she eased out of the bathroom, her eyes scanning the apartment. To her horror, the front door stood ajar, open about 6 inches. Her heart pounding, Chloe slowly, cautiously checked each room, searching for any sign of an intruder. The apartment was empty. Somehow, the door had been unlocked while she slept, and the gentle morning breeze, which she now chose to call the wind, had pushed it open. For the remainder of her time alone in that apartment, Chloe kept a knife close by, a constant reminder of the unsettling incident and the vulnerability she felt. The mystery of the unlocked door remained unsolved, a chilling reminder of the unknown. She vowed to get a better locking mechanism, even if she had to pay for it. The whispers of Route 23. The digital clock on my dashboard glowed 2:47 a.m. I remember the precise time because I glanced at it, wondering if Amelia would still be awake when I got home. I was driving down Route 23, that desolate stretch of highway that cuts through the heart of Miskatonic County, heading back from a double shift at the Peterson Tool and Die Factory. My name is Daniel Carter, and I've driven this road hundreds of times, but never like this. Never seen anything like this. The radio was playing some old country ballad, turned down low, just enough to keep me company. The headlights of my beat-up Ford pickup sliced through the darkness, illuminating the yellow center line that seemed to stretch endlessly into the black void ahead. The road was deserted, as it always was at this hour. Just me, my truck, and miles of empty fields on either side. The corn harvest had been weeks ago, leaving only dry, rustling stalks that whispered secrets to the wind. The moon was full and bright, hanging high in the sky like a silver coin, casting everything in that eerie, ethereal light that makes familiar landscapes seem alien. I first noticed something was wrong when my truck's temperature gauge started to plummet. It had been a relatively mild night, maybe 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but suddenly the digital readout showed 42, then 38, then 34. My breath started fogging in front of my face. The heater was blasting, but it felt like someone had rolled down all the windows. That's when I saw it. In my peripheral vision, out of the corner of my eye, something was moving alongside the road, keeping perfect pace with my truck. I was doing about 55 miles per hour, but whatever it was, it matched my speed effortlessly. First, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a shadow playing games in the moonlight. Maybe a deer, running parallel to the highway. But deer don't run that fast, and they definitely don't run like that. I slowed down cautiously, trying to get a better look. The figure slowed too, staying perfectly aligned with my passenger side window, a silent, unwavering companion. It was running on 2 legs. That much was clear, but the movement was wrong. The stride was too long, too fluid, too graceful for anything human. It was like watching someone move underwater, except at highway speed. My headlights caught it fully when I swerved slightly to the right, a desperate attempt to illuminate the impossible. The figure was tall, maybe 7 feet, but impossibly thin, almost skeletal. Its skin, in the harsh glare of the headlights, looked gray, but not like human skin. More like wet clay or polished rubber. It wore no clothes, had no hair, just that smooth, uniform surface, reflecting the light in a way that made my stomach churn. Its arms were what disturbed me the most. They were too long, hanging down past where knees should have been, and they didn't swing as it ran. They just trailed behind it, like ribbons in the wind, limp and lifeless. The head was the worst part. It was elongated, stretched back, as if it were being pulled by some invisible force. Where a face should have been, there was just nothing. Smooth, featureless gray. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just that blank, stretched surface, turned towards me, watching me as it ran. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine roared, and my truck lurched forward, straining against the sudden demand. 60 miles per hour, 65, 70. The figure kept pace. Its legs moved in that impossible, fluid motion, a grotesque ballet of speed and silence. At 75 miles per hour, it started to fall behind, but only slightly. That's when it did something I'll never forget. Something that still haunts my waking moments and invades my dreams. Turned its head, that smooth, featureless head, a full 180 degrees, to face me directly, while still running forward. And then, in a single, impossible instant, without slowing down, without turning its body, it veered sharply to the right and disappeared into the dense woods that lined that stretch of road. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screaming in protest, leaving long, black streaks on the asphalt. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe some primal instinct, some desperate need to confirm what I just witnessed, to prove to myself that it wasn't just a hallucination. The truck shuddered to a halt. I sat there, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The temperature gauge started to climb back up, slowly but steadily. 35, 37, 39. My breath stopped fogging. The night seemed normal again except for one thing. Where the figure had turned into the woods, there were marks on the road. Not footprints, not exactly. They were impressions, depressions in the asphalt, as if someone had taken a hot iron and pressed it into the surface, leaving perfect, oval shapes in a line, leading straight into the trees. I got out of the truck, my legs shaky, my heart still pounding. I had to see them up close. The marks were about 18 inches long and 10 inches wide. They were deep, maybe 2 inches into the solid asphalt. And the edges were smooth, perfectly formed, as if they'd been molded. I touched one cautiously. It was cold, colder than the air around it, colder than the asphalt itself. My fingertips went numb almost instantly. The trail of marks led straight into the woods. The trees were thick there, old oaks and maples, their branches intertwined, blocking out most of the moonlight. I could see maybe 30 feet in, where the marks continued in that unwavering straight line, ignoring all obstacles, trees, undergrowth, even a small, rocky stream. They just pressed through everything in their path. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, and started taking pictures. The flash illuminated the marks clearly, their unnatural perfection stark against the rough texture of the asphalt. I took a video, too, walking along the line of impressions, my breath catching in my throat with each step. That's when I heard it, a sound coming from deep within the woods, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across fallen leaves, but fast, too fast for anything natural. I ran back to my truck, my heart pounding, my lungs burning. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before finally managing to get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out, tires spitting gravel, not caring about the speed limit, not caring about anything except getting away. I drove straight to the Miskatonic County Sheriff's Department, the only place I could think of that might offer some semblance of safety. Officer Miller, a man I'd known since high school, was on duty. He listened to my story without interruption, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. I showed him the pictures and the video. He watched them silently, his brow furrowed. Then he made some calls. By sunrise, there were state police troopers and a team of investigators at the scene. They took samples of the marks, measurements, photographs. They questioned me repeatedly, asking the same questions over and over, as if trying to catch me in a lie. That was 8 hours ago. They're still out there, as far as I know. Scientists from Miskatonic University have arrived, analyzing the marks, running tests, trying to find a rational explanation. Officer Miller called me an hour ago. He sounded shaken. They'd found something in the woods, he said. A trail of those same marks, running for miles, straight as an arrow, ignoring all obstacles. Trees, rocks, even a small river. Nothing deflected the path. I'm sitting at my kitchen table now, trying to make sense of it all. Amelia is still asleep upstairs. I told her I got held up at work. I haven't decided if I'm going to tell her what really happened. How do you explain something like that? Something that defies logic, that breaks all the rules of the natural world. The local news is already picking up the story. They're calling it a mysterious vandalism incident, suggesting it might be some kind of elaborate prank. But I know what I saw. That figure running alongside my truck wasn't human. The way it moved, the impossible speed, that blank face, it was something else entirely. I've called in sick to work. I can't face that drive home again, not yet. Not while I keep seeing that smooth, gray head turning to face me in my mind. Not while I remember the way it just changed direction, defying physics, defying everything I thought I knew about how things move in this world. The police want me to come in later today to make a formal statement. They're bringing in some experts from out of state, people who supposedly deal with unusual phenomena. I don't know what to tell them. How do you describe something that shouldn't be possible? I keep checking my phone, looking at the pictures and videos. They're still there, still clear, still undeniably real. Proof that it wasn't just my imagination, that something truly did run alongside my truck last night at impossible speeds. But there's something else. Something I noticed when I was reviewing the videos earlier. In one of them, when I was filming the marks leading into the woods, there's a single frame, just one, where something moves in the background. It's blurry, obscured by darkness, but I can make out that same elongated head, turned at that impossible angle, facing directly at the camera, from between two trees. I've tried to convince myself it's just a shadow, a trick of the light, a glitch in the recording. But I know what I saw, and I know it saw me. Whatever that thing was, it was aware. It knew I was watching it, and for some reason, it wanted me to see it turn into those woods. The temperature in my kitchen just dropped. I can feel it, a sudden chill that has nothing to do with the weather. Outside, through the window, I can see the wind picking up, making the trees sway. But the leaves are moving in the wrong direction, as if being pulled towards something. I'm gonna stop writing now. I need to check the doors and windows, make sure everything's locked. The sun is up, but somehow, that doesn't make me feel any safer. Not when I know what's out there, running faster than any human could, leaving those impossible marks in its wake. If you're driving on Route 23 late at night, keep your eyes on the road. Don't look to the side. If you see movement in your peripheral vision, don't stop. Just keep driving as fast as you can until you're somewhere with lights and people and normal things that move the way they're supposed to. Because now I know, we're not alone out here in the dark. There are things that share our world. Things that can run alongside our cars on empty rural roads. Things that leave marks in solid asphalt like it's soft clay. Things that watch us with faces that aren't faces, moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. I don't know what it was that I saw on Route 23. I don't know if I'll ever know. But I do know one thing. I'm never driving that road at night again. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some mysteries should stay mysteries. The temperature is dropping again. I need to go. And maybe, just maybe, if I'm very quiet, if I listen very carefully, I'll catch a glimpse of something tall and gray, moving through my backyard, its head turned at an impossible angle, watching me with a face that isn't a face. But this time, I won't stop to take pictures. This time, I'll do what I should have done on that dark road. I'll keep moving, I'll keep going, and I'll try to forget what I saw. Because some things in this world aren't meant to be seen, aren't meant to be understood. Some things should stay in the shadows, running alongside empty roads in the dead of night, leaving their impossible marks in their wake. And me, I need to go check the locks. One more time, the switched-off breaker. Miles lived a solitary life about 15 miles outside of town, with no close neighbors. One evening, while waiting for his dinner to finish cooking in the oven, he decided to tackle the dishes. The distant sound of a truck idling outside barely registered in his mind, given his remote location where sounds often traveled surprisingly far. The idling continued for 5 to 10 minutes, then faded as if the truck was slowly driving away, stopping briefly, and then resuming its departure. Miles, focused on his meal, paid little attention. He has a very long driveway, perhaps a third of a mile, so it almost had to be on his property. After dinner, as he returned to finish the dishes, he discovered he had no water. The only plausible explanation that came to mind was a tripped breaker for the well pump, located in a breaker box outside. The box contained a few switches and a main switch, the smaller ones controlling the well pump and an outlet, while the main line to the house bypassed this box. Venturing outside, Miles found the breaker box door open and the main breaker switched off. The realization hit him with chilling clarity. The idling truck had been right outside his house, and someone had deliberately turned off the breaker, likely expecting him to come outside to investigate. They had assumed it would cut off power to the entire house, luring him into a vulnerable position. That night, Miles locked his gate, a precaution he repeated the following morning before leaving for work. The day brought rain, and upon his return, he discovered evidence confirming his fears. Tire tracks showed where someone had pulled up to the gate, found it locked, and then executed a 3-point turn in his driveway. For a long time afterward, Miles locked his gate at night, a constant reminder of the unsettling incident. He also acquired a .357 Magnum, keeping it close at hand, a tangible symbol of his newfound need for security and a stark contrast to the peaceful solitude he once cherished. The whispered warning. It was early evening, the sun having already dipped below the horizon. Young Ethan was downstairs in the living room, engrossed in a television show. His older brother, Noah, was upstairs in their shared bedroom, lost in the pages of a book. Suddenly, an unsettling feeling washed over Ethan, a sense of unease that seemed to whisper of his brother needing help. He ascended the stairs, the old wooden steps creaking under his weight. Their bedroom was at the end of the hallway, and as Ethan approached, his hand reaching for the doorknob, he heard a voice, clear and distinct. "I have to leave now." Opening the door, Ethan found Noah looking at him, a mixture of fear and confusion in his eyes. "Someone was just outside my window," Noah said, his voice trembling slightly. "They just said that they had to leave." Ethan questioned Noah, trying to make sense of the situation. "Were you talking to the person?" he asked.
No, Noah replied firmly.
The only thing they said was that they had to leave. The brothers, deeply creeped out, relayed the incident to their mother, but the event remained unexplained, a lingering mystery. For a long time, Ethan believed it might have been a dream, a figment of his imagination. However, years later, Noah brought it up, his memory of the event mirroring Ethan's in every chilling detail. "Hey, do you remember that one time when we were kids and someone was outside the window?" Noah asked. "Remember how he left right when you came in the room? What the hell was that?" The shared recollection solidified the reality of the experience, leaving both brothers with an enduring sense of unease and a lingering question. Who was the unseen presence outside the window, and what were their intentions? The bathtub intruder. Around the age of 12, young Sophia found herself home alone, enjoying a relaxing bath. As she rinsed her hair underwater, a sudden awareness pierced her tranquility. When she lifted her head, she realized she could hear footsteps, distinct, purposeful footsteps, moving around outside the bathroom, within the house. Both of her parents were at work, and she knew it was far too early for their return. Panic surged through her. Someone had broken into the house and was now roaming around, their intentions unknown. Sophia was trapped, naked and vulnerable in the bathtub, with no phone or any means of calling for help. Her mind raced, conjuring terrifying scenarios. Would the intruders eventually find her? Or worse, did they already know she was there, waiting for her to emerge? The sounds of the running water in the bathtub must have been audible, a clear indication of her presence. frozen with fear. Sophia remained in the tub for an indeterminate amount of time, her mind battling between the urge to flee and the paralyzing grip of terror. Finally, a surge of bravery propelled her into action. She waited for the sound of footsteps to cease, then cautiously got out of the tub, dried herself, and dressed. Opening the bathroom door, she peered out, waiting, listening. Silence. From her vantage point, she could see the hallway and the entrance to every bedroom. Building up her courage, she eventually searched the entire house, finding no one. The intruders were gone, leaving behind an unsettling mystery and a lingering fear. Sophia called both of her parents, who were still at work, her voice trembling as she recounted the terrifying experience. The incident left an indelible mark, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of being alone and the chilling reality of an unseen presence within her own home. What the hell was going on? The thumping in the walls. The first thump resonated through the old house at precisely 3:17 a.m. I know this with absolute certainty because I checked the glowing digits of my bedside clock, my heart already beginning its frantic tattoo against my ribs. It was a heavy, deliberate sound, like a booted foot striking aged wood, followed by another and another. Someone was walking down the basement stairs in my brother Ethan's Victorian house. Except Ethan was in San Francisco on a week-long business trip, and I, Benjamin Reed, was supposed to be alone in the house. I sat up in the guest bed, my cotton t-shirt clinging uncomfortably to my damp back. The air in the room was cool, yet I was sweating. My phone, lying on the nightstand, displayed a string of missed calls from my ex-wife, Clara, and a pathetically low battery percentage, 12%. I'd forgotten to plug it in again. A familiar wave of self-recrimination washed over me, quickly replaced by a more pressing concern. The footsteps. Thump, thump, thump. They continued their slow, measured descent. I'd arrived at Ethan's place 3 days earlier, after Clara had, for the fourth time in as many months, discovered the empty vodka bottles I'd pathetically attempted to hide in the garage, tucked behind the dusty boxes of Christmas decorations. Just until I get back on my feet, I'd pleaded with Ethan over the phone, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He'd sighed, the sound heavy with a mixture of exasperation and weary resignation. But he'd said yes. He always did. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A brief pause, a moment of unsettling silence. Then they started again from the top. My hands trembled as I pulled on my jeans, the denim rough against my skin. The guest room was on the second floor, directly above the kitchen. The basement door was in the kitchen. I knew the layout of the house intimately. I'd helped Ethan extensively with renovations 5 years earlier, before the drinking had spiraled out of control, before Clara had started finding empty bottles in increasingly improbable hiding places. Thump, thump, thump. I grabbed my phone, activating the flashlight app, and the baseball bat Ethan had thoughtfully, or perhaps prophetically, left leaning against the nightstand. Just in case, he'd said with a strained smile when he'd shown me the room. The weight of the bat felt reassuringly solid in my grip. The stairs creaked under my weight as I crept towards the hallway, each sound seeming magnified, amplified in the oppressive silence of the house. The kitchen was shrouded in darkness, the moonlight filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, distorted shadows across the linoleum floor. The basement door, a plain, unassuming wooden panel, stood closed, its outline barely visible in the gloom. The footsteps continued their relentless pattern behind it. My throat was parched, a desert of anxiety. A familiar craving, sharp and insistent, gnawed at me. A drink, my mind whispered, just one to steady your nerves. I pushed the thought away, a wave of shame washing over me. Focus, I told myself. Focus on the footsteps. I pressed my ear against the door. The sounds were clearer now, heavy. Work-booted feet on wooden stairs, moving with a strange, almost mechanical precision. Down, pause, reset, down, pause, reset. The wood didn't creak as it should have under that weight. The steps sounded wrong. My phone buzzed, a jarring vibration in the stillness. Clara's name flashed on the screen. Not now, I thought, my thumb hovering over the decline button. My battery percentage dropped to 11%. The door handle felt cold and slick under my palm. I tightened my grip on the bat, my thumb tracing the worn spot where the grip tape had peeled away. The footsteps continued their rhythmic, oblivious march. I pulled the door open. The hinges whined in protest, a sound that seemed to shatter the silence. I should have oiled them, I thought irrelevantly, remembering Ethan's casual request from weeks earlier. The basement gaped below, a maw of absolute darkness that swallowed the weak beam of my phone's flashlight. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving than the sound had been. It pressed against my eardrums, a palpable weight. I could hear my own breathing, too fast, too shallow. The air rising from the basement carried the faint scent of old wood, concrete dust, and something else, something metallic. Then the footsteps started again, from the top. But I could see the stairs now, illuminated by my phone's beam. They were empty, 14 steps. I remembered that from the renovation. Each one bare, unfinished wood, because Ethan had always planned to carpet them someday. Nothing moved on them, nothing visible at least, but the footsteps descended. Thump, thump, thump. My phone battery dropped to 10%. I took a step down, the wood creaking under my weight, a different, more natural sound than the phantom footsteps, which continued their descent, seemingly passing through me as I descended. No change in temperature, no brush of air, just the sound. The sound. 3 steps down. 4. The basement darkness pressed closer, a tangible entity. My phone light caught the edges of Ethan's workbench, at the bottom of the stairs, his tools hanging in neat, precise rows on the pegboard wall. Everything exactly where it should be. Ethan, the organized one, the methodical one, halfway down. The footsteps continued, their relentless rhythm unwavering. 9 steps. 10. The battery warning flashed on my phone. 9%. The footsteps reached the bottom again, paused, and started their ascent once more. I reached the basement floor. The concrete was cold beneath my sock-clad feet.
Ide furguten shuas.
My light swept across the space. Ethan's workshop took up roughly half the basement, tables cluttered with projects in various stages of completion. The other half was storage boxes of holiday decorations, old furniture, stacks of Clara's crafting supplies from when she used to visit. The footsteps continued above me now. Down, pause, reset. Down, pause, reset. My phone light caught something on Ethan's workbench. Piece of paper held down by a hammer. Ethan's handwriting, rushed but legible. Ben, had to leave for San Fran early business emergency. Make yourself at home, but don't go in the storage unit. Seriously, it's important. I'll explain when I get back. Ethan. The footsteps kept their rhythm. My phone dimmed, automatically adjusting to save power. 8% battery remaining. I should have gone back upstairs. I should have called Ethan. I should have left the house entirely. I should have done anything except what I did next. But I'd spent the last few years making a series of increasingly poor decisions. Why stop now? I moved deeper into the basement. The footsteps continued their relentless pattern on the stairs behind me, a metronomic beat of boots on wood. My light caught more of Ethan's workshop, the tools hanging perfectly aligned on their hooks. Something was off. I stepped closer. Each tool was secured to its designated spot, but the outlines were wrong. They didn't match the tools. A hammer hung where a saw was outlined. A wrench occupied the space marked for a drill. A pair of pliers dangled where a screwdriver should have been. I reached for the hammer. As my fingers brushed against the cold metal, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. My breath sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. The hammer felt wrong in my hand, too light, as if it were hollow. Behind me, a new sound began. Not footsteps. This time, it was the scrape of metal on metal, coming from deep within the storage area. My phone flashed another warning. 7% battery. The light dimmed further, casting the basement into an even deeper gloom. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. Something caught the edge of my light, a reflection where there shouldn't be one. Metal where Ethan stored cardboard boxes. I moved closer, my heart pounding. The boxes, they looked like cardboard from a distance, but up close I could see the truth. They were metal, painted to resemble ordinary moving boxes, holiday decoration containers, storage bins. Perfect replicas. The scraping sound came from behind them, regular, rhythmic, like the footsteps had been. My phone light revealed gaps between the metal boxes, spaces just wide enough to peer through. 6% battery. I leaned forward, pressing my eye to one of the gaps. My light revealed more metal beyond walls of it, spanning the space where the storage room should have been. The scraping grew louder. Something moved in the darkness beyond the metal walls. Something big. My phone died. The darkness was complete. The scraping stopped. Then, behind me, the footsteps began again, from the top of the stairs. Down. Pause. Reset. I dropped the bat. It hit the concrete with a clang that echoed off the metal walls. Not concrete. Metal. Painted to look like concrete. The storage boxes scraped against each other as something pushed them aside. Heavy steps approached, not from the stairs this time, but from the darkness beyond the false storage area. I ran. My feet, guided by a desperate, instinctive memory of the layout, found the stairs in the absolute darkness. Muscle memory, ingrained from those long-ago renovation days, kicked in. The phantom footsteps continued their relentless pattern, passing through me as I scrambled upwards, their sound a mocking counterpoint to my frantic flight. My shoulder slammed into the wall, real with this time. I could feel the difference, guiding me towards the top. 13 steps. 14. I reached the landing, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and turned the lock, the metallic click a small, fragile sound of defiance in the face of the encroaching darkness. For a moment there was silence, just my own gasping breaths and the frantic pounding of my heart. Then the footsteps started again. Down. Pause. Reset. And beneath them, a new sound emerged. The scrape of metal on metal, growing louder, closer, more insistent. It was coming from behind the basement door now. I didn't pack. I didn't change. I didn't even put on shoes. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door and ran, fleeing the house like a man possessed. The sun was rising as I pulled into a gas station, miles away, my body trembling, my mind reeling. My hands shook so violently I could barely plug my phone into the car charger. When the screen finally flickered to life, I dialed Ethan's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice laced with concern.
Ben,
"Are you okay? What's going on?" "Ethan?" I gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush. "What the hell is in your basement?" A long pause. The silence stretched out, taut and heavy. In the background, I could hear something, a faint, rhythmic sound, muffled by distance and the phone connection. Footsteps, walking downstairs. I can't tell you," Ethan said finally, his voice strained, almost unrecognizable. "But you need to tell me exactly what you saw, and you need to tell me, did it see you?" I hung up. I started driving again, aimlessly, desperately, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Ethan's house, between myself and that thing, in the basement. The empty bottles stayed in the trunk, untouched. I needed to stay sharp, to stay focused, because sometimes when I let my guard down, when I close my eyes, I hear them. Footsteps, walking downstairs, over and over and over, and underneath them, growing louder with each passing day, the scrape of metal on metal. Clara keeps calling. Ethan too. But I can't answer. I can't risk stopping. I can't risk sleeping too long in one place, because the sound follows me now. Down. Pause. Reset. Always the same pattern. Always getting closer. My car, which had been running perfectly fine for months, has started making strange noises. Not the usual mechanical sounds. Sounds like footsteps, walking downstairs. I've tried to find a rational explanation. Sleep deprivation, stress-induced hallucinations, a gas leak in Ethan's house, causing auditory distortions. But deep down, I know the truth. That basement, it wasn't just a basement. It was something else, something wrong. And whatever was down there, whatever Ethan was hiding, it's not confined to that house anymore. It's out, and it's looking for something. Or maybe it's looking for someone. I'm writing this all down now, in a cheap motel room in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I can't stop. I have to keep moving, because the footsteps are getting louder, and the scraping is almost constant now. And sometimes, very faintly, I think I can hear laughter, wet, gurgling laughter, coming from somewhere very close.